Chapter 1262. A red dragon with a wingspan of more than 100 meters hovered above the starry sky domain. Crassus and Julian stood on the dragon's back and looked down with disdain and mockery on their faces. Crassus, Lord of Fire. Julian, Lord of Frost. Red dragon. All the elves looked up, and a great magic caster quickly recognized the two old men standing on the red dragon's back and exclaimed. In the magic world, there had always been two peaks that represented the peak of ice magic and the limit of fire magic. They were the gods of ice and fire. The two of them had been fighting for their entire lives, but there was no clear winner. However, their powerful abilities were undeniable. Why did they suddenly appear here? Although the Red Dragon tribe was not considered powerful among the dragon tribes, there were still a few 10th-tier giant dragons. What was the meaning of this red dragon, Crassus, and Julian appearing here? The elven great magic casters who had almost forced Alex and Irina into a corner were all bewildered. Helena looked up at the two of them and the dragon with a hint of doubt in her eyes. She was afraid that there would be more trouble in today's siege. It's Amy's masters. Phyllis, who had climbed up to the peak and supported Irina, looked at the giant dragon and the two old men on its back, and exclaimed in surprise, "Could it be that Boss and the others are here to save us?" Shirley, who was guarding at the side, was also surprised. She had also seen the power of the two great magic casters with her own eyes. With their help, at least Alex could escape from his current passive situation. Poor Bin Sprout, he was here a long time ago. Irina glanced at Phyllis. This poor little girl was still kept in the dark by Meg. However, she was also surprised and touched when she looked at Crassus and Julian. She did not expect them to appear here. Crassus, Julian? Meg, who was dodging the spells in the starry sky domain, was slightly stunned when he heard the voice outside. They were not the reinforcements he had invited. It was completely out of his expectations. Little Irina, don't panic. We're here to save you. Crassus turned around and smiled at Irina. Julian also turned around to look at Irina. Although she was in a sorry state, she didn't seem to have suffered any serious injuries. Julian's expression eased slightly, and he nodded slightly. He then looked down at Helena with an icy expression. "Old thing, help me beat up that damned old woman to vent my anger." Irina laughed and shouted loudly. "Crassus, Julian, and the fire dragon race, what are you doing here? This is an internal matter of the elf clan. I hope you won't interfere. Otherwise, you will be seen as going against the elf clan." Helena shouted coldly. It was fine if it was Crassus and Julian, but where did that insignificant 9th-tier fire dragon get the courage to interfere with the elf clan's matters? Is it that great to go against the elf clan? Crassus sneered and asked in return. The last race that spoke to us like this was the man-eating demons, Julian said coldly. In that case, it's not that great, Crassus said with a smile. I was captured by them to be their mount. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't want to come here. That fire dragon finally found a chance to interject. His voice was full of grievance. He was a mighty 9th-tier giant dragon, but he was knocked out with a stick and chained up for an entire night. Then, he was forced to fly north early in the morning. He didn't dare to resist in the face of two ruthless people who killed dragons without batting an eyelid. However, he didn't want the Red Dragon clan to offend the entire elf clan. He could only risk his life to show that he was innocent. Helena's expression was a little ugly. She ignored that red dragon, and continued to shout coldly, "The elf clan is not something that the man-eating demons can compare to. If you don't want to face the revenge of the Wind Forest, then leave this place immediately." "Helena, you talk a lot of nonsense. It's like your foot-binding cloth. It's smelly and long. Is there anyone in the Wind Forest that can defeat us?" Crassus pursed his lips. Then, he looked down at the red dragon under his feet, and said, "Little Red, stay here obediently and wait for us to finish our fight. If you run away, then I'll go to Dragon Island and have a fight with your grandfather." "Yes." The red dragon replied sullenly. He was trembling and didn't dare to move. "Alex, Grandpa is here to save you again." Crassus took a step forward, and two spinning fireballs immediately appeared under his feet. They tore through the dark starry sky domain and smashed into the ground with a loud bang. A mage who was in the middle of casting a spell was sent flying, and the wind blades that were flying all over the sky instantly disappeared. He killed a supreme magic caster in an instant. A close combat magic caster is so scary. The elves were shocked. They looked at Crassus in a different light. At the same time, Julian, who was standing on the dragon's back, also made a move. The mountain where the underground cavern was located started to freeze rapidly from the middle. The elven guards who were still trying to break through the mountain peak were instantly frozen into white ice sculptures. The ice spread hundreds of meters around the mountain peak before it stopped. Run! The elves were shocked. They didn't dare to continue charging forward. They turned around and ran. Grandpa! Meg was speechless. Although Crassus was old enough to be his grandpa, wasn't this a little too much since they were acquaintances? However, Crassus had torn a gap in the starry sky domain, and another supreme magic caster had been killed. The pressure on him was greatly reduced. He slashed the tree branch that was wrapped around RZ's legs with his sword, and dodged a group of firebirds that were pouncing towards him. He then pounced towards the nearest supreme magic caster. Kill them! Helena yelled. The supreme magic casters retreated hurriedly. At the same time, they began to adjust their spells to target Crassus and Julian. Although there were only 3 of them, they posed a great threat to them. The firebirds in the sky changed direction and pounced towards Crassus. They formed a flame giant that was hundreds of meters tall in the air. It raised its huge fist and smashed it towards Crassus. Playing with fire with me? Crassus sneered. Then, he raised his right hand towards the flame giant. The flame giant's movements froze instantly. That fire element supreme magic caster held his magic staff. His face was flushed red, but the flame giant's body was still motionless. A sense of helplessness rose from the bottom of his heart. Explode, Crassus said with a relaxed expression. The 100-meter-tall flame giant suddenly exploded. The flames scattered in all directions, turning the crazily growing trees on the ground into ashes. The fire element supreme magic caster and the wood element supreme magic caster turned pale at the same time. Their mental strength was severely damaged. On the other side, Julian and Helena were facing each other. An ice phoenix shuttled through the starry sky domain, freezing the burning stars into ice. Behind the ice phoenix, dozens of burning meteorites chased after it, trying to blast it into ashes. The addition of Crassus and Julian saved Meg from an unsolvable situation. However, the other party still had 9 supreme magic casters. After retreating, they still managed to stabilize the situation, and once again surrounded Meg and the rest. A golden dragon and a frost dragon flew over from the south. 200 thugs in suits stood on each dragon's back. The high priest pushed his sunglasses up and pointed ahead. There are intense battle waves in front. I can feel the power of 10th tier. This should be our destination. Chapter 1263. Magic spells flew all over the sky and clashed in the air with loud noises. Tens of thousands of elven guards were watching from afar. A battle of this level was not something they could participate in without a commander. The purple-striped griffins flew in the starry sky domain, but they were always forced back by the focus fire every time they tried to get close to the magic casters. Crassus was fighting 1 against 3, and his chest started to rise and fall slightly. He was still a little weak in a battle of this level at his age. On the other side, the Ice Phoenix was finally hit by a meteorite after destroying half of the stars in the starry sky domain, and turned into ice shards. Helena took a step back with a pale face. There was only a little starlight left in the starry sky crystal ball, but she sneered as she looked at Julian in mid-air. If the elves couldn't kill the 3 of them with all their powerhouses, it would be difficult for the elves to establish themselves on the Norland continent. Kill them, Helena ordered coldly. The hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses that had gathered charged toward the 3 trapped elves. When the scales of victory tilted towards the elves, these hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses would become the last iron rod that crushed them to death. Sally, who was standing not far behind Helena, clenched her fists again. She heaved a sigh of relief when Crassus and Julian appeared, but the situation was still developing in the worst direction. A sky full of magic spells flew toward the three of them like fireworks. 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses were just children in front of 10th tier powerhouses. However, when enough children picked up their knives and attacked wildly, they could still kill a giant. All the elves' eyes lit up. The power of the elves was on full display at this moment. Hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses could blast any powerhouse into pieces when they worked together. Helena, this old witch, is really well prepared. Irina frowned. Her magic power was completely depleted, and she couldn't provide any help to them anymore. This is really a little troublesome. Julian flattened the sapling that popped out from the ground with one foot, still fearless. Meg looked at the sky full of magic spells with a slight frown. The timer in his eyes had entered the 60-second countdown, and he didn't have much time left. However, his men should be here by now, right? Roar. Right at this moment, a dragon's roar could be heard. A golden dragon and a frost dragon appeared in the sky above the mountain peak. For the glory of Lantiste. Charge! The high priest raised the crystal ball in his hand high up, and shouted in Lantiste. A vast ocean gushed out from the crystal ball, and turned into huge waves that welcomed the magic that filled the sky. Hundreds of thugs in suits wielded tridents and leapt off the dragon's back like dumplings. They stepped on the waves and charged fearlessly towards the hundreds of elves. Above the waves, 9 level 10 powerhouses stood guard and began to cast spells, which were then channeled into the high priest's crystal ball. The crystal ball flashed, and a water screen appeared in front of Mag and the rest in the blink of an eye. The water curtain shook violently. After withstanding the last magic attack, it dissipated and turned into a mist that filled the sky. Who are these people? Everyone present was dumbfounded when they saw those fellows in strange clothes with a black thing on their faces. However, they had to admit that the appearance of these thugs in suits was very impactful. Their neat black suits, black sunglasses, and cold expressions were very impactful. That water curtain that blocked all the magic attacks with ease made all the elves' eyelids twitch. Where did this group of powerhouses come from? The number of 10th tier powerhouses was not inferior to the number of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses in the Wind Forest. Who are these people? Helena's expression changed drastically. Victory was in sight, but this group of unknown powerhouses suddenly appeared. She was sure that this had nothing to do with the goblins stationed at the border. If the goblins had such a powerful force, they wouldn't be cowards. Who are these people? Irina was also confused. Although they looked like humans, they weren't from the Roth Empire. Moreover, they seemed to be on their side. It's Mia, Gina, and Miss Elizabeth. Firis exclaimed in surprise as she looked up at the golden dragon and frost dragon in the sky. It's them. Shirley nodded. Then, she looked at those thugs in suits, and her eyes lit up. Then, these powerhouses should be from Lantiste. Seems like this is also his arrangement. Although Irina didn't know what kind of power Lantiste was, she already had her own judgment. 400 thugs in suits from Lantiste stepped on the giant waves and collided with the elven powerhouses who were charging over. The giant waves messed up the elven powerhouses' formation. They didn't have time to cast their spells in the waves before they were knocked unconscious. They were obviously of similar strength and numbers, but after the elves were stopped at the front, their willpower crumbled instantly in the face of their ferocious opponents. Someone shouted, "Run!" Hundreds of elven powerhouses threw down their helmets and armor, and turned to flee. Shrink the formation. Kill those who run. Helena shouted coldly as she crushed an 8th tier elf. The fleeing elves were shocked, and quickly shrank in Helena's direction. Meanwhile, the other great magic casters also gave up on attacking Meg and the rest. Instead, they started to restrict the momentum of the thugs in suits who suddenly appeared. Finally, after the momentum of the waves stopped, they stopped those 400 powerhouses with the help of the dense forest, leaving behind a mess. The elves behind the dense forest panted heavily as they looked at those thugs in suits. Their hearts were filled with fear. These powerhouses of unknown origin were too terrifying when they charged. If not for the 10th tier magic casters covering them, they didn't know how many of them would be left alive. Who are you? Why are you attacking us elves? Helena questioned loudly as she looked at the high priestess who was standing in the air with a grave expression. The number of powerhouses on the other side was similar to that of the elves, but she couldn't tell which race they belonged to. To the elves, this could be an evenly matched battle. The high priestess frowned slightly as she looked at Gina, who was standing beside her. Chapter 1264. 400 thugs in suits descended from the sky and defeated the elves with a crushing force. This completely disrupted Helena's plan. The key was that Helena still couldn't determine where these 10 10th-tier powerhouses and hundreds of 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses came from. If such a force existed on the Norland continent, she definitely would have heard about it. Could this be Alex's force? A dangerous thought appeared in her mind. Alex had been missing for 3 years, and no one knew where he went or who he interacted with. However, it was almost impossible to build such a huge force in 3 years. But now, she could confirm that they were indeed here for Irina. Their goal was to take the night elves away. Uneasiness rose in Helena's heart. Although they still had 9 great magic casters, hundreds of 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses, and more than 20,000 elite guards on their side, they still had to face the night elves. Even if the elves won in the end, they would definitely suffer heavy losses if the other party fought to the death with them. The elves had already lost their queen and Borg consecutively, and Irina had openly betrayed them. If they were to lose their combat power today, the elves might not even be able to withstand the goblin chief who was stationed at the border if he were to march straight into the Wind Forest. And after a while, the peace talks would begin, and the elves, whose power had been greatly reduced, would lose their right to speak. This was something she couldn't accept. Helena looked at Irina on the mountain peak in the distance, and a tinge of unwillingness flashed across her eyes. Letting the tiger go back to the mountain would cause endless trouble in the future. However, she didn't have the chance to get rid of her today. What she had to consider now was how to preserve the elves' power to the greatest extent. Sally was also looking at those powerful beings in suits with shock and bewilderment in her eyes. Their outfits were very much like Mag's style, and only he would have such a strange and impactful outfit. However, she had never seen these customers in Mammy Restaurant before. However, she heaved a sigh of relief when she saw these people blocking the mountain peak. Today's war seemed to be coming to an end. Yo, I didn't expect Mr. Mac to have this trick up his sleeve. What a surprise. Crassus looked at those thugs in suits with surprise on his face. However, after seeing Yarbemia and Elizabeth, he could confirm whose men they were. He happily returned to the Red Dragon's back. Julian also kept his magic wand. Their goal had been achieved, and there was no need for them to do anything else. Meg made the purple-striped griffin fly higher. The 15-minute countdown was over, and the fatigue from overexerting his body. Luckily, he had a mask, and it wasn't easy to detect while he was on the griffin's back. He was very satisfied with the appearance of the 400 thugs in suits from Lantiste. The visual effect of each wave being stronger than the previous one was also very outstanding. With the momentum of a surprise attack, they instantly turned the tide of the battle. 15. Is Mammis Sis. 15 minutes was too short, and Julian and Crassus were obviously here to save Irina. It wasn't realistic for them to join forces to kill Helena now. As for the warriors of Lantiste, Meg had promised them that he wouldn't force them to do anything dangerous. Fighting a bloody battle with the elves would definitely result in a lose-lose situation for Lantiste. Furthermore, the warriors of Lantiste were very powerful in the sea. Once they went ashore, they wouldn't have enough water elements, and their abilities would decrease as the battle dragged on. Meg rode the purple-striped griffin and looked down at Helena and the elves. He said in a deep voice, "Helena, this is your last chance to retreat. If you don't, I believe the goblins will be very willing to clean up the mess and take over the Wind Forest." The elves' expressions changed drastically. They had almost forgotten that the goblins had tens of thousands of soldiers waiting for them dozens of kilometers away. "High Priestess, we have already suffered heavy losses today. For the future of the Wind Forest, let's retreat today," a great magic caster said softly with fear in his eyes. Helena's expression was cold. She took a deep look at Irina, and loudly said, "The Wind Forest will remember what happened today. We will repay you tenfold in the future. Retreat. Following Helena's command, the elven army began to retreat. However, they were no longer as orderly and imposing as they were when they attacked the underground cavern. They threw away their armor and fled north. They were obviously scared out of their wits. Sally looked towards the mountain peak, and Shirley's gaze also landed on her. Their gazes met, and they nodded slightly. Then, she turned around and followed Helena to retreat. The tens of thousands of elven guards retreated in the blink of an eye, leaving only corpses and ice sculptures on the ground, as well as the tragic traces left behind by the previous battle. We won. The remaining hundreds of night elves cheered loudly on the mountain peak. Although they were covered in blood and almost exhausted, they were very excited. Although they relied on the help of reinforcements from the outside world, they were still the ones who won this battle. It played a crucial role in the history of the Night Elves' resistance. We won. A smile also appeared on Irina's face. However, when her gaze landed on the dead elven soldiers and the elves who were turned into ice sculptures below, there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. In the war, the ones who died the most were still the elven soldiers at the bottom of the hierarchy. However, those exploiters were still alive and well. Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he watched the elves leave. If Helena had fought to the end without regard for anything, then it would be unknown how many people would be able to leave this place alive. This result had already exceeded his expectations. He was very satisfied. RZ turned around and flew towards the mountain peak. Two great magic casters from Lanteast blocked his path with nervous expressions. "Gina, he's one of us." Elizabeth shouted at Gina. She looked at Alex with a complicated gaze. She didn't expect to see him here again. However, there were some questions that she was destined to not have the chance to ask because the female lead today was Irina. Gina hurriedly made the two great magic casters move aside to prevent any accidental injuries. She was also sizing up the man who was riding a strange steed curiously. "Is that Alex? Wow, he looks so cool wearing a mask. And his steed is so handsome. It's purple, and it has super dazzling patterns." Yarbemia had already turned into a fangirl with stars in her eyes. Meg rode the purple-striped griffin and landed on the mountain peak. Then, he reached out his hand to Irina. "I'll bring you away." Irina looked at Meg with a smile on her face. However, she didn't reach out to take his hand. Instead, she shook her head slightly. "They need me. I can't leave yet." Meg looked at the elderly night elves. Almost all of them were injured. He couldn't help but feel a little sad when he thought of how they had defeated an enemy 10 times their size. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll wait for you." Meg patted RZ's back gently. The purple-striped griffin flapped its wings and flew towards the west. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1265. Meg leaped onto the griffin's back and let out a long sigh of relief after the griffin left the underground cave. He was so tired that he didn't even want to move his fingers. A real man for 15 minutes was indeed unbearable. However, other than exhaustion, he didn't feel any other side effects. This was also one of the uniqueness of the system. He asked RZ to send him back to the 9th peak where he had parted ways with Gina and the others, and told it to come back and pick up Irina and the others. Then, he found a place to return the clothes and climbed onto the bald eagle that was shivering on the ground. He laid on its warm and soft back and closed his eyes to rest. The siege of the Night Elves was successfully resolved. It went smoother than he had expected. However, Mag had sensed an unusual aura and power from Borg's body when he had killed him. Furthermore, he could clearly sense that Irina's holy light seemed to have a suppressive effect on that aura, which was why he had been able to kill that skeletal winged tiger so easily. "System, what's on Borg's body? Why do you want me to kill him?" Meg asked in his heart. This was the first time that the system had issued a killing mission. Moreover, the other party didn't seem to have anything to do with cooking. This person's existence has seriously affected the quality of the rice in the wind forest. It may also threaten the production of shiitake mushrooms, causing the fertile land in the wind forest to be polluted. Although the system has already dealt with it, this person must be eradicated as a source of pollution, the system answered. A source of pollution? Meg frowned. He still didn't understand the system's words. That's the black fog that doesn't belong to this world. It's extremely corrosive to any living being. According to the system's detection, the black fog of the same origin has appeared in many places on this continent. It's expanding rapidly and has already threatened many farms of the system. Although the system has already carried out many rounds of cleanup, the black fog is too stubborn and has shown signs of developing drug resistance. In order to protect the farms and ranches, the host must go and clean up the black fog. At the same time, the mission line of traveling around the continent will be activated. Do you still want to save face? As a system, you can't even protect your own farms and ranches. Meg pursed his lips, but he was still a little wary of the sudden black fog. Something that could make the system helpless was definitely not easy to deal with. Due to the tense situation earlier, Meg did not have time to look at the rewards carefully. Now that he was resting, he clicked on the rewards that had not been announced earlier. Mobile restaurant, upgraded version of the restaurant. Equipped with a flying thruster, the entire restaurant can move in flight. In flight mode, the highest speed can reach Mach 5, the catacombs. The elves had retreated, and the merfolk of Lantiste had also dispelled their battle mode. They regrouped and waited to be airlifted home. Thanks, old man. I'll treat you to a drink next time, Irina said as she looked at Crassus and Julian on the dragon's back. She was grateful and touched. Then I won't hold back. However, Alex is really rude. He ran away without saying a word, Crassus said with a smile. Do you think everyone is as shameless as you? Julian mocked in a hoarse voice. However, he looked at Irina with a gentle gaze, and a smile appeared on his cold face. Heh. Looks like you want to fight with me, Crassus said with an unfriendly expression. Do I need to choose a day to fight with you? Julian asked with a cold smile. My two masters. Can we go back now? The red dragon said, wanting to cry. He was afraid that these two big bosses would fight with him. If that happened, he would not be able to survive. The two of them looked down at the red dragon at the same time. The red dragon shut up immediately. His eyes flashed with resentment. Do whatever you want. Don't bother about me. Crassus looked at the frozen elves, and pursed his lips. Ice old man, you'd better ask Irina if those fellows you froze still need. They will really die in a while. They're not dead yet. Irina's eyes lit up. There are about 1,000 elves. They're still alive. Julian nodded. Then please defrost them all, Irina said hurriedly. But, Your Highness, they're here to attack us. Wouldn't it be bad if we let them go? Phyllis asked in bewilderment. The other night elves were also confused. They had sacrificed hundreds of their companions to win this battle. Now, they had to save these enemies. What is the philosophy of the night elves? It's to unite all forces, overthrow the rule of the exploiting classes, and build a new free kingdom. Irina looked at the night elves. These are all low-level elven soldiers. Most of them are slaves. They are elves who were captured by the demons from all over the continent and brought back to the forest. In this war, they are just like us. They are victims. Those exploiters are still watching this war from above. They don't care how many low-level elves die in this war. What the night elves want to do is not to massacre the wind forest. Instead, we want to overthrow the class rulers and use violence against the oppressors to gain more support from the low-level elves. If we slaughter these soldiers today, will there be any soldiers willing to join us in the future? Will there be any elves who will believe us? The night elves were silent as they pondered over Irina's words. Many of them were captured by the demons and suffered all kinds of torture. They were not selected to join the army because they were too old and became slaves. They knew how difficult it was for the low-level elves to survive. Your Highness is right. The young elves are the future of the forest. If these young elves are willing to join the night elves, our revolutionary team will be strengthened. Only then will we have more hope to overthrow the rule of the wind forest, a night elf who had lost an arm said loudly. The other night elves nodded. The night elves had suffered heavy losses in this siege. If they could inject new blood, it would undoubtedly be a good thing for the night elves. Julian saw that everyone had reached an agreement. He waved his magic wand, and those human-shaped ice sculptures shattered instantly. The pale-faced elves collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily with fear on their faces. The Wind Forest had sent out all their elites, but they were defeated in the end. Furthermore, it was a crushing defeat, leaving them here. Meanwhile, those elves who had been knocked unconscious by the Lantisteans were all awakened by the cold water splashing on them. They quickly realized what had happened when they saw that there were only those terrifying men in black and night elves left. Their faces were also pale. "You don't have to panic. I won't kill you." Irina stood at the edge of the mountain peak and looked at the elves. "The Wind Forest has already abandoned you. In their eyes, you are already dead. Now, you have two choices. One is to join the Night Elves and overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest with us, and build a free kingdom for the rest of your lives. The other is to leave on your own. Chaos City is now open to all elves and provides shelter. You can live a peaceful life there. Com. Wonderful book house. Com. Chapter 1266. 10 kilometers south of the border between the Wind Forest and the underground cavern, tens of thousands of goblin soldiers were on standby. A middle-aged goblin in golden armor whose head was twice as big as a normal goblin's stood on a high platform and looked toward the north with a bewildered expression. Although he was over 10 kilometers away from the battlefield, the intense magic wave from before still made him a little fearful. If only Alex came to help the Night Elves, why would there be such an intense magic wave? Could it be that the Night Elves wanted to surround and kill Alex as well? Even if that was the case, there shouldn't be such an intense magic wave. But on the Norland continent, who would be willing to offend the entire elven race for the Night Elves? "Chief, the Wind Forest's allied army has retreated in defeat." Right at this moment, a goblin popped his head out of the cave and shouted loudly. "The Wind Forest has retreated in defeat." The goblin chief was shocked. How is that possible? All the goblin soldiers were shocked when they heard that. The Wind Forest had sent an allied army of 20,000 to 30,000 to besiege the Night Elves, and the Night Elves only had 3,000 old, weak, women, and children. How could the Wind Forest have retreated in defeat with such an overwhelming difference in strength? Apart from Alex, who else came? The goblin chief quickly asked. This result was too abnormal, and it was destined to shake the Norland continent. "There's also the Lord of Fire Crassus and the Lord of Ice Julian, and Anne." That goblin was a little anxious, but he didn't know what to say. "I didn't expect the Lord of Fire and the Lord of Ice to come too." The goblin chief was slightly shocked. The abilities of these two great magic casters were enough to be ranked among the most powerful people on the continent. Even with them on the Night Elf side, they couldn't stop the elites of the elven race. How could the elves have retreated in defeat? And what? The goblin chief asked nervously as he suddenly realized something. It seemed like a certain force had participated in this battle, and that was why the outcome of this battle had changed. And a group of mysterious people who suddenly appeared. They were wearing black clothes, and their eyes were covered by two black discs. They descended from the sky and crushed the elites of the elven race. After that, the allied army of the elven race retreated to the Wind Forest in defeat. That goblin tried his best to describe the scene he had seen earlier. "What kind of race is this?" The gnome tribe leader was confused. I don't know. They don't look like humans, demons, or elves. They can't be demons or trolls," that goblin said innocently. If he could tell what race they were, he wouldn't have described it like that. This power was indeed mysterious. They could actually hide on the Norland continent for such a long time. If they suddenly descended upon the goblins would have no way to fight back. Thus, he immediately ordered, "Go and find out where this power came from." Yes. A few goblins obeyed the order, and jumped into the hole nearby. The ice and snow melted. The captured elven soldiers looked at each other with hesitation and struggle in their eyes. Submit to Chaos City and live a comfortable life, or join the Night Elves and fight for freedom. This was not an easy choice for them who had lost their dignity and freedom for many years. Irina stood at the edge of the mountain peak. She didn't urge them to make a choice. Instead, She looked at the elves quietly and waited for them to make their choice. My daughter was killed by those beasts. I want to avenge her personally. A middle-aged elf walked out and knelt down on one knee. He lowered his head and loudly said, I am willing to join the night elves and follow Her Highness to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest. My parents were killed by the demon mercenaries in order to protect me. I am willing to join the night elves and avenge them, a youth said with clenched teeth as he knelt down on one knee. I am willing to join the night elves and fight for freedom. One by one, the elves stood out and knelt down on one knee, choosing to join the night elves. Fight for freedom. Inspiring slogans could be heard all over the mountain. All the elves chose to join the night elves. No matter if it was for revenge or for freedom, they still chose to resist. Fight for freedom. Irina also raised her clenched right fist. Is this Princess Irina? She is so beautiful, and her aura is so strong. She is just like a queen. Yarbemia looked at Irina with amazement and envy. Even though she had become a golden dragon, she still couldn't learn such an aura. Elizabeth was silent, and there was also a hint of envy in her eyes as she looked at Irina. When they were still working hard on their cultivation, Irina was already standing at the top of the entire continent and had the courage to challenge a powerful race. Princess Irina and Sir Alex are really a perfect match. I wonder if I will have the chance to see them again in the future. Today, when they stretched out their hands, my girlish heart exploded. Yarbemia started to be infatuated again. She is so cool. Barbara also looked at Irina with amazement. She was also a princess, but at this moment, she deeply felt the difference between her and this beautiful and powerful elven princess. Is the Moon Nation equal? Does it also need freedom? Barbara held her chin and fell into deep thought. This woman is truly terrifying. Should I withdraw as well? Camilla looked at Irina with fear. She suddenly remembered the day she was sent flying with a stool. But why was she there? What was the relationship between her and Meg? Let's go. The little girl has already grown up. Seems like she doesn't need us two old men anymore, Crassus said with a gratified smile. Let's go, Julian also said coldly. Please sit tight, sirs. We will leave now. That red dragon was relieved, and immediately flapped its wings to escape. Irina waved her hand with a smile, and said, I owe you some wine. I will pay you back next time. We will be waiting. The voice flew away together with the red dragon. Irina turned to look at Yarbemia and the Lantisteans, and said gratefully, and everyone, on behalf of the Night Elves, I thank you for coming to our rescue. You are welcome. We are here to save Phyllis and Shirley. They are our friends. Yarbemia waved her hand, feeling flattered. Also, this is Boss' idea. Boss is so nice. He actually put in so much effort to rescue us for me. Phyllis was touched. Chapter 1267. Upon hearing Yarbemia's words, Irina's lips curled up slightly. After experiencing some things, he had indeed changed. He was more considerate, and was no longer the man who only believed in the sword in his hand. However, when her gaze landed on Yarbemia, Elizabeth, and the rest of the ladies, her beautiful eyebrows raised slightly. These ladies were really beautiful. It was indeed the same as before. Even if he hid his identity and power, there would still be a group of beautiful ladies around him. Luckily, I'm more beautiful than them. Hey, isn't this the bat that he tied up previously? Why is she here too? Could it be that he has feelings for her after tying her up? Irina's gaze stopped on Camilla, and her eyes narrowed slightly. I've been discovered. Camilla was shocked, and instantly felt uneasy. So many people were watching. Was she going to embarrass herself? Irina retracted her gaze from Camilla. She didn't feel that her position was threatened. Anyway, Meg couldn't defeat her now. If he really dared to have any ideas, hey. You're welcome. Gina also shook her head on behalf of Lantiste. She looked at those severely injured night elves, and exchanged a few words with the high priest. Then, she looked at Irina, and said, Do you need help? Treatment. Looking at the puzzled Irina, Yarbemia quickly translated for her. Gina doesn't really know how to speak the common language, but she should be asking if she needs help to treat those injured elves. If it's possible, then please. Irina's eyes lit up. She had used up all her magic now, and couldn't cast any healing spells. Gina understood Irina's words, and said a few words to the high priest. The high priest nodded slightly, and then tossed out the crystal ball in his hand. Streaks of clear, ice-blue water flew out from the crystal ball, and washed over the night elves. The blood on their bodies was instantly washed clean, and the arrows and stones that were stuck in their bodies were taken away. The horrible wounds started to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a few breaths' time, the wounds on the thousands of night elves had already healed. Although their broken bodies couldn't be reborn, the pain was gone, and the elves' faces were filled with joy. "Thank you," Irina said solemnly. The high priest and Gina exchanged a few words. "This is our promise to Mr. Meg. If you want to thank someone, thank him," Gina said with a smile. "I'll thank him properly." A smile appeared on Irina's face. "We should go." Gina turned to look at Yarbemia and Elizabeth. Lantiste should not be exposed too much. "Phyllis, Shirley, are you going back to Amy's with us?" Yarbemia asked Phyllis and Shirley. "Anna mentioned you a few times. She must be missing you," Yarbemia said to Shirley. Shirley's lips moved. Looking at Irina's back view, she eventually shook her head. Phyllis was a little tempted, but she shook her head firmly as she looked at Irina. Irina looked at Shirley and Phyllis, and said, "You two go first. I will go to Chaos City to look for you. The night elves will recuperate and grow in Chaos City." Phyllis and Shirley's eyes lit up. In that case, they could go back to work at Amy's again. Yarbemia and Elizabeth transformed into giant dragons again, and carried the Lantiste warriors, Phyllis and Shirley, to the south. Camilla also quickly picked up Barbara and followed. It was too dangerous to stay behind alone. If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have come today. She didn't do anything, but she felt like she was being watched. Although she liked pretty big sisters, and Irina was indeed very beautiful, she was too strong, and she liked to be the one who took the initiative. After everyone left, Irina looked at the elves, and said, "The night elves are not strong enough. We need to find a safer place to grow. Hence, I have decided to lead the night elves down south and enter Chaos City in small groups. We will build a new base in Chaos City and find a chance to counterattack the Wind Forest. Chief, the mysterious man has left on a dragon. We don't know where he went. Over 1,000 night elves are heading down south. Should we stop them?" The two pieces of news quickly reached the Goblin Chief. The Goblin Chief pondered for a while, and then said in a deep voice, "There's no need to continue tracking them. There's no need to continue tracking the whereabouts of the mysterious man, lest we anger them. Prepare 1,000 good horses for the night elves and let them go down south. Big Sister 1111, when will Father and the rest come back? They went to beat up the bad guys. Will they be in danger?" Amy asked 1111 worriedly as she hugged Ugly Duckling in Amy's. Anna, who was lying on the counter, sat up straight and looked at 1111 nervously. "Don't worry. Mr. Mac and the rest will be fine. They will be back soon," 1111 said gently. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. Although she didn't know what Mr. Mac and the rest had gone to do, it seemed to be something dangerous. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left the two little fellows in the restaurant. "Don't worry, Anna. Father will bring Big Sister Shirley and the rest back." Amy walked to Anna's side and held her little hand gently. "Meow." Ugly Duckling also reached out its chubby little hand and placed it on Anna's hand. "Ugly Duckling, your fat paws are too heavy," Amy said with disdain. Anna looked at Ugly Duckling's chubby little pink paws and smiled. Meg, who had rested on the bald eagle's back for a long time, turned over. After chewing a few American ginseng, the emptiness in his body was finally filled up. Calculating the time, it was about time for them to return, so he jumped down from the bald eagle's back. He stroked the bald eagle's head, which was as arrogant as a puppy, and comforted it. Soon, two giant dragons, one gold and one silver, appeared in the sky. "Boss, we did it. We brought Phyllis and Shirley back," Yarbemia said excitedly as she landed on the mountain peak and let Phyllis and Shirley down. "Thank you, Boss, Phyllis said to Meg with a blushing face. Thank you. Shirley also expressed her gratitude to Meg. If the people from the restaurant hadn't arrived in time today, they probably wouldn't have been able to leave the cave alive. We're all on the same side. It's good that you're back. Meg waved his hand with a smile. Then, he looked at the high priest of the merpeople, and thanked him. Thank you for your help. You're welcome, Mr. Meg. This is our promise. The high priest nodded slightly. In this operation, only a few merpeople warriors were slightly injured. Meg's request wasn't too much. It was much easier than he expected. MIA, Elizabeth, send them back to Lanteast first, Meg said to the two of them. The two giant dragons flew in the southwest direction. Only Meg, Phyllis, Shirley, Barbara, and Camilla were left on the mountain peak. This bald eagle can only carry 2 people. Who wants to ride with me? Meg asked the ladies. Me. Chapter 1268. Chaos City, the City Lord's castle, in the study. What's going on? Michael looked at the secret, urgent letter in his hand in shock. You saw it too. Roland barged in, and closed the door after seeing the secret letter in Michael's hand and his expression. How did this happen? Where did that group of mysterious people come from? They actually defeated the Wind Forest. Michael was still in disbelief. Even if all the high-end combat power in Chaos City were to bet, they might not be able to do that. What shocked him even more was that Chaos City had no news of such a powerful force before this. They didn't even know of their existence. The information that the Grey Temple received was more comprehensive. Roland took out a secret letter and passed it to Michael. He continued, Alex indeed went to the underground cavern to rescue the Night Elves. The Wind Forest was already prepared. They sent out 10 great magic casters to besiege Alex, and tried to kill him and Irina together. Alex killed Borge in the midst of the siege, and there were signs of him being surrounded. Crassus and Julian joined the battle, and the elves had the advantage in numbers. After that team of mysterious people appeared. Under the lead of the 10 great magic casters, they defeated the Wind Forest's powerful team, and announced that they were here to rescue and protect the Night Elves. Julian and Crassus have always been on good terms with Irina. They almost took her in as their disciple back then. I just didn't expect them to go against the Wind Forest, Michael said in surprise. Although these 2 old fellows are old, their way of doing things hasn't changed. Moreover, the 2 of them are together, which is enough to make any force wary. They are also a ticking time bomb in Chaos City. We have to be careful at all times. Roland nodded with a slight headache. Let's not bother about Crassus and Julian for now. But where did that group of mysterious people come from? The sudden appearance of such a powerful race on the eve of the peace talks between the various races might make things worse for the peace talks. Michael frowned. Although there were many details of the battle in this secret letter, he still couldn't make an accurate judgment of the identity of those mysterious people. This matter still needs some time to investigate, but the report mentioned that those mysterious people arrived on a golden dragon and a frost dragon. This might be a direction for the investigation. Roland shook his head slightly. This matter was indeed a little strange, but at present, it seemed that there was still a direction to investigate. Other than that, what do you think of the Night Elves heading south? Burke is dead, and Irina set up the Night Elves to openly oppose the Wind Forest. Furthermore, they defeated the Wind Forest in this catacombs siege. The elves' vitality has been greatly damaged. They may choose to maintain the status quo in this peace negotiation, focusing on eliminating the Night Elves and recuperating. Roland thought for a moment and said, I think we should secretly accept the Night Elves into the city and provide them with the necessary help. The strengthening of the Night Elves can absorb the Wind Forest's desire to expand. This is a good thing for the peace of the Norland continent. Helena's actions are too extreme. She forcefully turned the Wind Forest into a feudal kingdom, and made the elves fight for fame and fortune like humans. If Irina's Night Elves can succeed, this is also a good thing. Michael nodded. In the Roth Empire, the king and the ministers were having a meeting in the meeting hall. The second prince, Josh, was among them, but he looked a little absent-minded and anxious. The encirclement of the night elves by the wind forest gave him a headache. Although he had repeatedly contacted Helena and Burke through letters, he couldn't get their promise that they wouldn't harm Irina, nor did they agree to hand Irina over to him. Today was the day the wind forest launched their final attack on the night elves. Although he had promised Burke last night that he would support him to become the Elven King if Irina didn't die and was delivered to him, he didn't receive Burke's reply. He didn't know what the situation was like now. If the king hadn't asked him to stay, he would have gone to the wind forest personally. A guard quickly came to the door, and respectfully said, "Your Majesty, urgent report." "Present it." King Andre took the secret letter and read it personally. After a while, he let out a soft gasp. The ministers looked at each other. They didn't know what could make His Majesty so shocked, but no one dared to ask. Josh also looked at Andre nervously. He had a feeling that this urgent report was most likely related to the night elves and Irina. After a while, Andre put down the secret letter in his hand, and said to the ministers, "The wind forest's encirclement of the night elves has been repelled." The meeting hall was silent for a moment, and then there was an uproar. Although the ministers had tried their best to control their emotions, they still couldn't hide the shock in their hearts. The difference in power between the wind forest and the night elves was like that between a giant dragon and an ant. They had mentioned this before, but such an obvious outcome didn't arouse the ministers' interest. They all said that the wind forest would be able to completely annihilate the night elves today. However, this outcome gave them a loud slap in the face. How is this possible? The Prime Minister was shocked. If that's the case, Irina shouldn't be dead. Josh was elated. Although he was also shocked by this outcome, it had completely exceeded his expectations. Alex killed Burke, Andre continued. The meeting hall quietened down instantly. The ministers were shocked by Alex's power, but they kept their expressions and kept quiet out of fear. During this period of time, Alex had been a taboo in the Roth Empire's officialdom. No one denied his power and greatness. It was just that he was once the pride of the Roth Empire, the number one in the military, and no longer belonged to the Roth Empire. He might even be standing on the opposite side of the empire. Furthermore, the elves were the Roth Empire's stable allies. As the commander of the elves' military, Burke had died in Alex's hands today. This was also a loss to the Roth Empire. Did Alex save her again? This fellow is indeed as detestable as before. Josh clenched his fists. This was undoubtedly the outcome that he didn't want to hear the most. It was even worse than Irina dying in the chaos. Apart from Alex, Julian and Crassus also appeared at the same time, as well as a group of powerful and mysterious people, Andre said calmly as he glanced at Josh. Powerful and mysterious people? All the ministers were shocked. What kind of mysterious people could make the king use the word powerful to describe them? The outcome is a little unexpected, but it doesn't have much impact on the Roth Empire. Let's investigate the background of those mysterious people. Perhaps there are still things in this world that we don't know, Andre said in a low voice as he placed the secret letter on the table. Chapter 1269. Irina accepted the 1,000 fine horses from the goblins, and expressed her gratitude to the goblin chief. Although the goblins didn't contribute to the night elves in the previous war, at least they didn't kick the night elves when they were down. Furthermore, they provided the underground cavern for free previously, and even gave them horses to go south now. They were already doing their best for the night elves. Chief, the night elves are also elves. If they become stronger, will they be more difficult to deal with than the wind forest? A goblin asked worriedly as he watched the night elves leave. We goblins and elves have been neighbors for 1,000 years, and this neighbor has only turned bad in the past 100 years. It's all because of that old hag Helena. If Irina can really make the elves return to how they used to be, it will only be a good thing for us goblins. The goblin chief shook his head with a smile as he looked in the direction where the night elves left. With the support of Alex and that mysterious power, Irina's counterattack on the wind forest would probably begin soon. If the goblins provided timely help, they might even have another ally in the future. With the fine horses to ride, the night elves' speed increased tremendously instantly. Howl. Right at this moment, a loud cry came from above their heads. A purple-striped griffin was circling above the night elves as it stared at the leader, Irina. RZ. Irina looked up at the purple-striped griffin in surprise. Captain Ashley stepped forward with a smile and said, "Your Highness, you can leave first. I will lead the night elves to Chaos City and find a good place to set up camp." Irina looked at Ashley. This loyal captain had outstanding talent in managing the army, and she had 9th-tier power. Among the night elves now, she was second only to her. "All right. I will look for you when we reach Chaos City." Irina nodded and leaped onto a huge rock at the side from the horse's back. The purple-striped griffin swooped down and landed beside the huge rock. It extended its wings onto the rock so that Irina could walk on it easily. "Little Azzy, come over and let me touch your head," Irina said with a smile as she wasn't in a hurry to get on the griffin's back. Howl. Azzy shrunk its head back instinctively and whimpered as it looked at Irina nervously. "You won't die from a touch. Why are you so petty?" Irina's voice turned cold. "Or do you think you can't touch your head now that you're all grown?" Meow. The purple-striped griffin was instantly terrified. It immediately stuck its head out and allowed Irina to ravage it. Although it refused at the start, when Irina placed her hand on Azzy's head, the purple-striped griffin with a wingspan of over 100 meters rolled all over the ground like a kitten. It even flipped over, revealing its stomach, and looked at Irina fawningly with its tongue out. Irina retracted her hand from Azzy's head and kicked Azzy's stomach gently with the tip of her foot. She smiled and said, "Let's go. Bring me back to Chaos City. I haven't seen my little Amy for a long time. I miss her so much." Howl. RZ flipped over and shook off the dust on its body. When Irina got on its back, it flapped its wings and suddenly soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds and flying towards the south. "Big Sister 1111, I think Father should be back soon," Amy probed as she looked at 1111, who was busy in the kitchen. "Millimeter. They might be back for lunch. But I'd better make something for you two first," 1111 replied without turning back. "It's all right. We're not hungry at all. We can wait for Father and the rest to come back and eat together." Amy shook her head. Then, she tugged at Anna's sleeve gently. "Don't you think so, Anna?" Anna glanced at Amy, and then at 1111 in the kitchen. She nodded and said, "Millimeter. I'm not hungry, either. You have to eat even if you're not hungry. You're still growing. If you don't eat on time, you won't grow tall," 1111 said firmly as she shook her head. "It's all right. I like to be small like Big Sister Barbara. I'm not tall, and I'm so cute." Amy blinked. "I want to be like Big Sister Shirley. I want to be tall and skinny." Anna thought for a while, and then shook her head. "But it's all right to eat later today. I want to wait for them to come back and eat together." 1111 turned back to look at the two of them, and helplessly said, "I say, although the food I make isn't as delicious as Mr. Max, the two of you should at least give me some face." Amy and Anna shrugged at the same time, while Ugly Duckling turned its head away. Knock, knock. Right at this moment, there was a knock on the door. "Are they back?" Anna jumped up from her chair and dashed towards the door. "That's great." Amy's eyes also lit up. She picked up Ugly Duckling and ran towards the door. Anna stood on her tiptoes and pushed open the door with some difficulty. She was stunned when she saw Shirley standing at the door. Her hair, which was usually neatly combed, was a little messy. Her beautiful dress had become a light armor full of holes. There was a lot of blood on her body. She didn't know if it was hers or someone else's. Anna's eyes reddened immediately. "I'm back." A smile appeared on Shirley's face. She took out the little rabbit that Anna asked Phyllis to bring her. The white rabbit was already stained red with blood. Anna dashed over immediately and jumped into Shirley's arms as she sobbed. Shirley hugged Anna gently and then hugged her tightly in her arms. Her tense nerves seemed to have finally relaxed at this moment. "Big Sister Bean Sprout, Big Sister Shirley, Big Sister Camilla, you're back," Amy exclaimed in surprise. She looked around again and worriedly asked, "Where's Father and Big Sister MIA?" "They're still behind. They should be back soon," Phyllis replied. She felt very close to being called Big Sister Bean Sprout by Amy. It felt great to be back at Mammoth again. If the Night Elves were to set up camp in Chaos City, then she could go back to work at Mammoth again. That's great. We'll have lunch now, Amy said happily. Seems like I won't be able to showcase my culinary skills this afternoon, 1111 said regretfully as she glanced at the ingredients that she had already washed. Oh, yes. Where's Big Sister Aisha? Why didn't she come back with you? Amy asked after some thought. Anna also lifted her head from Shirley's arms with a look of concern. Shirley let go of Anna and held her little hand as she said, she won't be back for the time being, but I think she'll definitely come back. Chapter 1270. Boss, I suggest you change the seat of this bald eagle. It's not very practical, Meg said with a smile after he received the deposit from the beast tamer. It might not be practical for others, but isn't it good for you and your wife? The beast tamer glanced at Barbara with a chuckle. However, he was cursing Meg in his heart. How could he do that to such a young lady? Barbara blushed. If Meg's hand wasn't behind her, telling her to calm down, she would have kicked this stinky fellow and that stupid bird away. That makes sense. I'll look for you again when I'm going out next time. Meg smiled as he pulled Barbara's sleeve and walked into Chaos City. Everything went smoothly today, and he even killed that old Borge. He was in a good mood. The Night Elves' problem was solved, and the elves lost their confidence to fight for the Norland continent. It was a small contribution to world peace. Furthermore, he received a new reward from the system, a restaurant that could fly. Its speed wasn't 80 miles per hour, but Mach 5. This speed was far beyond the speed limit of the world's top fighter jets in his previous life. Meg couldn't help but look forward to what the flying fortress looked like. According to the system, the flying restaurant existed independently, and wasn't remodeled from the original restaurant. The system was managing it temporarily, and he could request for it to be used when he needed it. This is really a good tool for a holiday. Mag thought to himself as he began to plan for his next holiday. Perhaps he could bring the restaurant staff and his good friends to the sunny beach in the south to bask in the sun, enjoy the sea breeze, and have a beach barbecue. Host, the flying restaurant is an important place for the host's growth. It's also a divine tool for opening a restaurant in a foreign land quickly. Please don't treat it as a simple aircraft. That's a serious blasphemy to the flying restaurant, the system warned. Mammoth is doing well, so why should I open a restaurant elsewhere? Isn't that neglecting the essentials? In the process of gaining popularity, other than earning less money, it can't improve my cooking skills. Meg pursed his lips, disagreeing with the system's words. A true god of cooking will not be confined to one place and be a frog in a well. Only by cooking 10,000 dishes and traveling 10,000 miles can one become a true god of cooking. I hope the host can understand this principle, the system said earnestly. All right, tell me, when are you leaving? Meg raised his eyebrows. When he heard the system's nonsense, he felt that things were not as simple as they seemed. He might really have to go somewhere else. As for the black fog that the system had mentioned earlier, he was rather concerned about it. There was clearly something wrong with the death aura emanating from Borge's body. If it weren't for Irina's holy light, he wouldn't have been able to slay that black tiger and kill Borge. An aura that didn't belong to this world, yet it eroded all living beings. To this world, it probably didn't just affect the system's cooking. The system will continue to monitor the black fog. If physical methods are still unable to control it effectively, the host will need to go to the farm and ranch to clear the black fog. The time will be at least 1 week later. The time limit is not set. It will depend on the host's efficiency, the system said. Speaking of which, if I help you clear the black fog, it's also considered working for you, right? How will the salary be calculated? Meg raised his eyebrows. Host, you're wrong to say that. How can this be considered working for me? This is to maintain the supply chain of Mammoth ingredients. It's not working for the system. I don't care. When we meet the black fog, we'll calculate it according to its volume. For every cubic centimeter that I clear, you'll pay me 1 copper coin. This price is very fair, right? That's a black fog that even a great and powerful system like you can't deal with. Speaking of which, it seems to make sense. That black fog is indeed very stubborn, and its drug resistance is getting stronger and stronger. Even the system, which has existed for 500 million years, can't completely clear it. The system muttered, seeming to be a little shaken. Then it settled. Meg turned into a side alley and pulled off the beard on his face and the loose robe on his body. Barbara also took off her veil and cloak and put them into the bag that Meg passed to her. She returned to her usual attire. Do you know the leader of the Night Elves today? That super beautiful princess? Barbara asked curiously as she followed Meg out of the alley. She quickened her pace and walked side by side with Meg. She came to the restaurant for a meal. Meg nodded. Barbara's eyes lit up, and she asked expectantly, then will she come to Mammoth today? Phyllis and Shirley are both back. She seems to have a good relationship with them. I'm not sure about that. You seem to be looking forward to her arrival. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Barbara in surprise. RZ had already gone to pick up Irina. She would naturally come to the restaurant today, but it shouldn't be during the day. Of course, I like her a lot. Barbara immediately nodded, her eyes filled with little stars of adoration. Don't tell me. Meg's eyes revealed some vigilance, and he said hesitantly, Camilla didn't do anything to you on the way, right? She lifted me by the collar and flew around. I was about to turn into a dog from the cold. Barbara rolled her eyes and didn't want to recall that memory. She said excitedly, you didn't see it. That princess was super cool, just like a queen. Everyone wanted to submit to her. Perhaps that's the case. Meg nodded slightly with a smile on his lips. It seemed to be quite satisfying to hear others praise his wife like that. You don't have to think about it. Her man is a super powerful knight. He rode a cool purple-striped griffin to save her. Although his face couldn't be seen, he must be a very tall and mighty man. Barbara clenched her fists in front of her chest, as if she was still immersed in the scene of that knight reaching out his hand to Irina. Then, she looked up at Meg and sighed. Compared to him, you are still far behind. Yeah, I can't compare. Meg nodded in agreement. He really couldn't compare to himself. However, it seemed that Irina was indeed very charming. She could make Barbara, who always tried her best to play the role of a tsundere, become a little fangirl. She was a little cute. Barbara glanced at Meg, and seemed to feel that her words were a little harsh. She coughed dryly, and said, I mean, compared to him, you are indeed far behind him. But compared to ordinary men, you are still okay. After saying that, Barbara added, of course, I want to reiterate that this doesn't mean that I like you. Yeah, I don't like children, either. Meg patted Barbara's head lightly, and strode away with a smile. For me, I'm not a child. I'm already a woman. Barbara looked at Meg's back and stomped her feet in annoyance. She looked down at her chest, and muttered, they are already so big. Chapter 1271. Ding ding. The sound of a bell rang from outside the door. Everyone's eyes lit up as they looked in the direction of the door at the same time. It must be Father who's back. Amy was the first to jump up. She skipped to the door and grabbed the doorknob. With a click, the door slowly opened outwards. Father! Amy exclaimed in surprise when she saw Meg standing at the door. However, she quickly stopped in her tracks and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She turned her face away and said with some grievance and anger, Father is a bad guy. He got out of bed in secret and didn't bring Amy to beat up the bad guys. He also didn't make me breakfast. Amy, I'm feeling a little emotional. I want kisses, hugs, and to be lifted up high. Meg, who had already opened his arms and was ready to accept the little lowly's hug, looked at the peeved Amy and smiled. He walked up to pick Amy up and kissed her on the cheek. He smiled and said, yes, it's Father's fault. I shouldn't have secretly set off without Amy's knowledge. As he spoke, he lifted Amy high above his head and then put her down again. He lifted her up again and put her down again, just like a little bird flying in the sky. He. Amy, who was still pulling a long face, laughed happily. After lifting her up and playing with her for a while, Meg hugged Amy and said with a smile, "So, have you forgiven Father now?" Amy thought for a moment and nodded. "If there's still a good meal, then I'll reluctantly forgive you." "All right, then I'll make lunch for everyone." Meg smiled and nodded. He carried Amy into the house. Everyone had been running around this morning, so it must have been tiring for them. "Uncle Meg, thank you." Anna went up and looked at Meg gratefully. "Good girl." Meg smiled and patted Anna's head. "Thank you," Shirley said gratefully as she stood behind Anna. She never thought that Meg would go against the wind forest for her and Phyllis and take such a huge risk to save them. To her, who had almost no friends since she was young, she was indescribably touched when she saw Yarbemia and Elizabeth bringing the people from Lanteast. "Thank you, boss, and everyone," Phyllis said gratefully as she looked at Meg with sparkling eyes. "You're welcome. Mammy Restaurant is like a big family. I hope everyone can live well. Even if Irina, he wouldn't be able to sit and watch. Sit down and rest for a while. I'll go and cook," Mag said to everyone as he put Amy down and walked to the kitchen. "Mr. Mac, you've raised these two little fellows to be picky. They don't want to eat my food anymore." 1111, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, looked at Meg helplessly. "Sorry to trouble you this morning. Why don't you invite Lulu and Lord Julian over for lunch? It'll be livelier with more people around," Meg said with a smile. "Sure. It would be great if we could get a free meal," 1111 said with a smile. She took off her apron and hung it at the side. She walked towards the door and softly said, "I wonder if Lord Julian is back yet." Everyone sat down and waited for lunch. Barbara, on the other hand, was curiously asking Phyllis about Irina and the night elves. She was completely different from her usual arrogant and cold self. Amy followed Meg into the kitchen. Meg dumped the ingredients that 1111 had cut into the kitchen waste bin at the side, and turned to look at Amy as he said, "Little Amy, go and wait outside too. Father will be done very soon." "Father, where's big sister Irina? Didn't you go to see her? Didn't she come back with you?" Amy asked softly as she walked up. Meg glanced outside, and then softly said, "She didn't come back with us, but she should be coming to Chaos City soon. Meg will be able to see her again very soon." "That's great. I like big sister Irina." Amy's eyes lit up, and a happy smile appeared on her little face. Speaking of this, Meg suddenly thought of Amy's death notebook. He wondered what the little fellow had recorded in it during this period of time. As he washed the vegetables, he tried to ask, "Amy, that notebook of yours, don't worry, Father. I keep a record of it every day," Amy said with a smile. "No, I mean." Meg felt a little flustered when he heard the word record. "Don't worry. I've hidden it in a place where no one can find it. I'll definitely be able to pass it to big sister Irina." "That's good." Meg sniffed. This little fellow was really strict. This made him a little flustered. 1111 came back not long after. Apart from Lulu and Julian, Crassus also came. It seemed like the two of them didn't part ways immediately after they returned to Chaos City. Shirley and Firis expressed their gratitude to the two great magic casters. If it weren't for the two great magic casters' help, the Night Elves wouldn't have been able to hold on until the people from Lanteast arrived. "Mr. Mac, where did you find that gang?" "They're a little fierce," Crassus said curiously as he stood at the entrance of the kitchen and looked at Meg, who was cooking. That group of people in black suits was brought over by Yarbemia and Elizabeth, so they obviously had something to do with Amy's. 10 10th-tier powerhouses with mysterious identities. This was enough for them to rule a territory on the Norland continent. However, even with his and Julian's knowledge, they still couldn't guess the origins of this group of people. They didn't even know which tribe they belonged to. "You definitely wouldn't believe me if I said I met them by chance, but that's all I can say." Meg smiled. He didn't want to reveal too much about Lanteast, even to Crassus and Julian. Crassus looked at Meg, and suddenly smelled the fragrant aroma of meat. He swallowed his saliva subconsciously, and pursed his lips. "All right, I'm not the one who has a headache. If you say you met them by chance, then so be it. As long as there's lunch for me." Which baddie master, you didn't even bring me along to beat up the baddies. Little Amy is getting angry. Amy put her hands on her hips and turned her head away. Little Amy, we were afraid of waking you up. We'll definitely bring you along next time. Okay, little Amy, which baddie do you want to beat up? We'll bring you to beat him up now. The two great magic casters who were over 100 years old started to coax the little girl. They weren't afraid of 10th tier powerhouses, but how to coax their precious disciple gave them a headache. Let's get ready for lunch. Meg walked out personally with a big spicy grilled fish, and placed it in the middle of the big table that was put together by 2 tables. The dishes on the table were all removed, and the rich aroma wafted out. It was already past lunchtime, and everyone who was starving swallowed their saliva at the same time. Ding! Right at this moment, the bell rang outside the door. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1272. I'll go open the door. Amy was the first to run to the door. She jumped up and hugged the doorknob, and the door slowly opened outwards. Big sister Irina, Amy exclaimed in surprise when she saw Irina standing at the door. Irina had changed into a long white dress somewhere. She was neat and tidy, just like that noble and proud princess. She looked at Amy with a smile, and stroked Amy's head. Long time no see, Amy. Oh. It's Princess Irina. Barbara stood up with her mouth slightly agape. She had just heard many stories about her from Phyllis, and they were as exciting as any heroes in history. She didn't expect to see her again so soon. Princess. Phyllis also stood up in surprise, and walked towards the door. Is Her Highness here too? Shirley also stood up. Although Irina had already said that the Night Elves were coming to Chaos City to develop, she didn't expect her to come to Mammoth so soon. Is this Princess Irina? Anna looked at Irina curiously, and her eyes lit up. What a beautiful elf. What a beautiful elf. Is this the legendary Princess Irina? 1111 looked at Irina in amazement. Lulu, who was sitting beside her, looked at Irina warily. Why is she here? Camilla, who had just picked up her chopsticks, dropped them on the table, and her expression became a little unnatural. Whoa! Meg looked at Irina, who was standing at the door, and his heart tightened. He suddenly had an ominous feeling. He thought he still had an afternoon to prepare for Irina's arrival, but he didn't expect her to arrive so soon. I seem to have come at the right time. Everyone wouldn't mind if I had a seat, right? Irina glanced at the table full of delicacies before her gaze landed on everyone with a smile. Her gaze lingered on Mag for a while, intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, no problem. Meg immediately moved a chair and placed it next to his seat. What a joke. How could he dare to say that there was a problem? As for the others, other than Camilla, there would naturally be no problem. As for the problematic Camilla, she was about to crawl under the table. This meal was too dangerous. She wanted to calm down under the table. Is this seat oiled? There shouldn't be any delicious food hidden under the table, right? Irina asked with a smile as she walked over while holding Amy's little hand. When she passed by Camilla, she gently grabbed her collar and lifted her up from under the table. I dropped my chopsticks. Camilla shook the chopsticks in her hand and smiled awkwardly. Well, it's good that the rope didn't fall off. Irina nodded and sat down beside Meg. She glanced at Meg with a smile. Camilla blushed. She suddenly remembered that other than Meg, Irina should be the only witness. This was too embarrassing. Meg looked down and picked up his chopsticks to pick up a piece of fish for Amy. He said carefully, "Be careful, it's hot." Sharaba. He could already feel it. It was too scary. And this could only be a beginner-level Sharaba. Are you going to pay back the wine you owe us so soon? Crassus chuckled as he looked at Irina. Yes, it's not good to owe wine for too long. If I can pay it back today, I naturally can't wait until tomorrow. Irina nodded with a smile, then looked at Meg. I'll go pour the wine. Meg quietly got up and walked to the kitchen. He suddenly felt that his status in the family had plummeted. I'll go help. Phyllis immediately got up and walked to the kitchen. When she took the 2 large glasses of beer that Meg had poured for them, She whispered, "Boss, I hope you don't mind. Her Highness is usually like this, but she doesn't mean any harm and doesn't mean to order you around." "Well, I understand." Meg nodded. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he still had to put on a calm expression. All the adults were given a glass of beer, and the 3 children were given a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. "Why am I getting orange juice? I want to drink too." Barbara looked at the juice in front of her and looked at Meg angrily. This was blatant disdain. She was the only one who drank juice like Amy and Anna. "Minors are not allowed to drink." Meg pointed at a warning sign on the wall. "It's not good for children to drink. They won't grow tall." Irina looked at Barbara and said seriously, "That's right. Sister Barbara has to grow up faster. Anna is almost catching up with you." Amy took a sip of juice and nodded. "Critical hit. Critical hit. Critical hit." Barbara took a sip of juice to calm herself down. Hey! Surprisingly, it was quite tasty. Everyone's gaze could not help but look at Meg, Irina, and Amy. This triple barrage of vicious words was really smooth and coordinated. Moreover, the 3 of them sitting together, the beautiful and noble Irina, the delicate and cute Amy, and the steady and handsome Meg, really did look like a family. However, everyone knew that Irina and Alex were the real couple. Today, Alex had killed everyone in the catacombs, killed Borge, and saved the night elves from disaster. Although Meg was also very outstanding and could make all kinds of delicious food, there was a big gap between him and Irina. They were not people who could walk together. Phyllis looked at Meg and Irina sitting together and tapped her finger lightly under the table. Then, she looked at Amy with some confusion. How did Amy know the princess? Julian looked at Amy, then at Irina. His gaze stopped on Meg's hand for a while, and he seemed to be deep in thought. "Come, let's toast to defeating the Wind Forest together today." Crassus raised the wine glass in his hand and said with a smile, "Cheers." Everyone clinked their glasses in the middle and finished their drinks in one gulp. "This is Camilla, Countess Bartoli. She's now in charge of preparing ingredients in the restaurant. This is 1111. Beside her is Lulu. They're our neighbors." Meg started to introduce the people at the table to Irina. "I'm Barbara. I admire you very much. You've helped me find my direction in life," Barbara said herself. Irina looked at Barbara and nodded slightly. "Good luck. As long as you work hard enough, you should have a chance to see my back." "I'll work hard." Barbara nodded seriously as if she had received great encouragement. "You're druids?" Irina turned to look at 1111 and Lulu with some surprise and curiosity in her eyes. "I heard that Helena got demons to exterminate the druids. I didn't expect druids to still exist in this world." Chapter 1273. Lulu's body tensed up, and she stared at Irina like a cheetah. "Yes, perhaps we are the last pair of druids." 1111 nodded. Even though she was smiling, there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Since the world tree is with you, then the druids haven't perished yet. However, there seems to be something wrong with your world tree." Irina looked at 1111, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "You can tell?" 1111 looked at Irina with a hint of surprise and wariness in her eyes. The elves wanted to exterminate the druids precisely because the world tree could threaten the tree of life of the elves. Even though this speculation was completely baseless, it brought about the extinction of the druids. "I grew up under the tree of life, so I can sense the unusual aura in you. However, you don't have to worry. I am different from Helena. I don't think the druids will cause any bad effects to the elves. You are just like us. You are all spirits of life nurtured by nature, so the tree of life chose us, and the world tree chose you." Irina looked at the 2 of them, and shook her head slightly. "I can also sense that you are different. This is the first time that the world tree wants to get close to you. You are not a bad person." 1111 nodded with a smile on her face. Lulu only relaxed after hearing that. "Perhaps I can provide you with some help. Let me see your world tree after dinner," Irina said with a smile as well. "I'll have to trouble you then." 1111 nodded with a hint of hope in her eyes. Even though her body had recovered a lot during this time, her stomach still hadn't shown any signs of activity. If Irina could help repair the world tree, she might still have a chance to get pregnant. Everyone was a little confused by the conversation between Irina and 1111, but that didn't affect their enjoyment of the delicious food and wine. The hot spicy grilled fish and the cold beer were the best of the best. Together with all kinds of delicious food, this was a complete and sumptuous meal. Every dish was an extremely delicious experience. Although this red braised meat is a little fat, it's delicious. The meat is fragrant and melts in the mouth. It's fat but not greasy. This fish head is soft and refreshing. It's spicy and delicious. This roast duck, Irina, who had been trapped in the catacombs for half a month, was soon immersed in the delicacies. She was full of praise for each dish, and her gaze toward Meg grew more and more satisfied. Her husband was simply too amazing. What's the use of only knowing how to fight? You can't possibly fight every day at home, right? Finding a husband who fought fiercely outside and cooked delicious meals at home was simply too blissful. Hearing Irina's praise and feeling her admiring gaze, Meg felt a little smug. Yes, that was the feeling. Even if she was the high and mighty elf princess in the eyes of others, the powerful and independent master of the Dark Knight, she would still be captured by him after eating his medicine, food. Father, there's no more food in my bowl. I want to eat fish. Amy looked at Meg and pouted. Okay, I'll get some for you. Meg quickly stopped his floating heart and picked up a piece of fish for Amy. The atmosphere during lunch was unexpectedly relaxed and happy. Perhaps it was because Irina knew most of the people and didn't put on airs, so they didn't become nervous or awkward because of her participation. After lunch, everyone was a little tipsy after drinking a lot of beer. Crassus and Julian left noisily, saying that they wanted to find a place to have a good fight and determine the winner. Shirley left with Anna and her things. After she returned, Anna ended her lodging life in the restaurant. Let's go. Let me see your tree of world. Irina and 1111 went to a corner. 1111 spread her palms out in front of her, and a faint green light lit up from her lower abdomen. A small sapling quickly appeared on her palm. It was about 2 palms tall and had 3 small branches. However, there were only 9 leaves on it, and even though it was green and lush, it seemed to lack vitality. It looks quite different from the tree of life, and its aura is completely different as well. It feels natural. Irina's eyes lit up when she saw the tree of world. She stared at the complicated veins on the leaves for a long time, and then looked up at 1111. You and it were both severely injured, right? Yes. Not every time we run for our lives. 1111 nodded. There was a hint of helplessness and sadness in her smile. Irina nodded slightly. She thought for a while, and then took out a small white porcelain bottle from the ring on her finger. She pulled the cork out, and a strong aura of life immediately rushed out. The tree of world seemed to have sensed the aura. Its leaves swayed slightly, as if they were being blown by a breeze. This is the lotion of life. 1111 looked at the small porcelain bottle in Irina's hand in surprise. Lulu's eyes also lit up. They had thought about the lotion of life before, but it was extremely precious and could only be found in the wind forest, so they could only give up on the idea. Yes. It can heal some serious injuries. Maybe it will have some good effects on you and the tree of world. Irina nodded and passed the small bottle to 1111. The tree of life lives in your body. Drink it all and see if it has any effect. This is too precious. 1111 hesitated. She didn't take the small porcelain bottle. Compared to a human, this is just a bottle of special dew that the tree of life produces every year. Irina shook her head and looked at her belly. Also, don't you want to be a mother? You two are the only druids left. 1111 was stunned. She looked at the small porcelain bottle, and a hopeful look appeared in her eyes. A child. She had wanted to have a child all these years. However, she had lost the possibility of becoming a mother after that serious injury. Thank you. 1111 took the small porcelain bottle with both hands. She stood up and bowed to Irina. Then she took a deep breath and poured the few drops of milky white lotion into her mouth. The rich aura of life enveloped her. It surged from her mouth to her limbs and bones, and rapidly healed the hidden injuries in her body. More of the aura of life turned into a light green light and surged toward the Tree of World. The World Tree, which was only the size of 2 palms, began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. Green leaves began to grow from the branches, and gradually, it became a small tree half a meter tall, full of green leaves. Its whole body was glowing, and mysterious runes could be faintly seen on the leaves. It looked quite mysterious. 1111 slowly opened her eyes, and stroked her lower abdomen with elation on her face. She could feel that she seemed to have regained the ability to give birth to life, and because of the growth of the World Tree, her power seemed to have increased as well. Congratulations, you are now a level 9 sorcerer. Irina looked at 1111 with a smile. Also, you can give birth to a child. An ordinary civil servant, by chance, returned to the 25th year of the Republic of China, was forced to join the military, to search for underground organizations, to track down Japanese spies, in the magnificent era of the motherland, to contribute his own strength to the liberation and revival of the nation, began his legendary career of espionage. Chapter 1274. Thank you, thank you. 1111 stood up and bowed deeply to Irina. Her face was filled with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. Lulu bowed to Irina with a bashful smile. She looked at 1111 with adoration and joy in her eyes. Irina shook her head with a smile, and said, "You're welcome. Take it as a compensation from me on behalf of the Wind Forest. I hope the druids and elves can coexist peacefully in the future." "It would be best if we could coexist peacefully," 1111 said with a smile. "Looks like we're going to have a little druid soon." Meg walked over with 2 cups of water with a smile. "Is that a little bear or a kitten?" Remi asked curiously as she came up to him. "Maybe a panda?" Irina looked at 1111 and Lulu. "That would be too precious." Meg raised his eyebrows. "It would be interesting if they really gave birth to a national treasure. I'll be very happy no matter what it is." 1111 stroked her stomach gently, and a blissful smile appeared on her face as if there was already a little life inside. Meg looked at the tall World Tree, and asked curiously, "I'm curious about something. Why is this tree called the World Tree? Can it grow a world? I've only heard about this from the tribe leader once when I was young. After the World Tree matures, it will form a small world of its own. The druids will live in that small world without any worries, and won't be disturbed by the outside world. However, before I was born, the World Tree had already been destroyed, and the small world had also disappeared. Countless druids who had lost their homes died in the war between species." 1111 shook her head, and there was a hint of loneliness in her voice. "I've read about it in the Elven records. The World Tree takes 1,000 years to fully mature. Even though you two also have a lifespan of 1,000 years, you most likely won't have the chance to live in that small world." Irina reached out and gently touched the leaf of the World Tree. The leaf shrunk back shyly, looking very intelligent. "Even if we can't live there, it's a good thing that our children can live there," 1111 said with a smile. She didn't feel disappointed. Instead, she looked forward to it. When 1111 and the others left, Camilla had already found a chance to slip away. Phyllis cleared the table and came up to Irina. "Princess, where do you plan to go now?" "Where to?" Irina glanced at Meg, then smiled and said, "The food here is too delicious. I've decided not to go anywhere. I'll stay here." "Ah!" Phyllis was a bit surprised. She glanced at Meg, leaned forward, and whispered, "Princess, with your status, you're not suitable to be a waitress. It won't be good if people know about this." Irina smirked. "Who said I'm going to be a waitress?" "I'm going to," Meg hurriedly said. "Princess Irina, do you want to stay overnight? There's a room upstairs that's empty. If you need it." But before Meg could finish his sentence, Amy had already grabbed Irina's hand and begged, "Sister Irina can sleep with me." Sister Anna left. "I'm so scared to sleep alone. I have no choice. It's always hard to refuse a lowly's request to sleep with her. Then I'll stay and sleep with Amy." Irina smiled and patted Amy's head. That's great. Amy narrowed her eyes and rubbed her head against Irina's hand with a happy smile on her little face. Hey! Someone else intercepted you? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at Irina and Amy, who had reached an agreement, the corners of his mouth also curled up slightly. Phyllis's mouth was slightly agape as she looked at Irina and Amy in disbelief. Why would Her Royal Highness, who didn't like children, suddenly agree to sleep with Amy? Could it be that Her Royal Highness wants to familiarize herself with taking care of children first? After all, young mistress is about the same age as Amy. I wonder where young mistress is now. Phyllis thought to herself, but she still asked hesitantly, Princess, are you sure you want to stay in the restaurant? Bean Sprout, have you entered your naggy old age? Irina reached out and flicked Phyllis's forehead. Ouch, it hurts. Phyllis held her forehead and nodded helplessly. Okay, then you can rest in the restaurant tonight. Do you have any other plans in the afternoon? No, I just want to have a good night's sleep in the afternoon. I haven't had a good night's sleep in a while. Irina shook her head, looking a little tired. Meg looked at Irina with some heartache. He looked at Phyllis and said, Phyllis, you should go back and rest too. I'll take care of Her Royal Highness. Let MIA and the others come to the restaurant for dinner tonight. We'll have a good celebration tonight. Okay, then I'll have to trouble you, boss. Phyllis nodded and left the restaurant, looking back repeatedly with every step she took. Go and rest first. Meg locked the door and walked to Irina's side. Irina was not in a hurry to go upstairs. Instead, she looked at Amy with a smile and said, Amy, have you been keeping a diary during this time? Yes, I've been very serious every day. I'll go get it for you. Amy immediately nodded and ran behind the counter. She pulled out the diary from behind a pile of books and handed it to Irina as if she was presenting a treasure. Come, let's go upstairs and take a look. Irina glanced at Meg, who had a calm expression. She held the diary in one hand and Amy's hand with the other and walked towards the stairs. Fuck. Did something happen? Meg's expression changed as soon as Irina turned around. 10,000 alpacas instantly ran through his mind. Although he still maintained his integrity and chastity during this time, it was inevitable that there would be some normal interactions at work when he worked with the employees every day. He could only hope that Amy did not write down the way Gina greeted him, the various confessions from the female customers, and Camilla sleeping on the floor in his room because she was too tired, all these things in the diary. Although he did not do anything. If he really wrote it down, it would be as if he did do anything. I miscalculated. I should have paid attention to this problem earlier and made improvements. Meg sighed in his heart. To uphold the bottom line of a qualified parent, he had not secretly looked through Amy's diary, so he was not able to grasp her recent records. After going upstairs, Meg realized that the big bed in the bedroom was already occupied by Irina and Amy. Looking at Irina nestled in Amy's arms and giggling as they read the diary together, Meg's lips curled into a gratified smile. He gently closed the door that was left ajar and quietly went to sleep on the floor in the children's room next door. What else could he do? In this family, his status was obviously declining rapidly. However, when he thought of Amy's smile, his heart felt as sweet as honey. The little fellow was indeed happiest when she was with her mother. There were some things that he could not replace. Amy closed the diary, looked up at Irina, and said seriously, Sister Irina, I think Father likes you very much. I also like you very much. Can you be my mother? Chapter 1275. Irina lowered her head to look at Amy. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and her azure blue eyes were filled with hope and expectation. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. When she first opened her eyes after being born, the little girl also looked at her like this. At that time, she only knew how to sob. In the blink of an eye, she had already grown so big. In the missing 3 years, she had always wondered if the father and daughter were still alive, if the little girl that was born from her body had grown up, if she was hungry. When she first saw her in the Magus Tower, the feeling of blood connection was so strong. She finally saw the child that was forcibly taken away again, and the little girl had already grown into a beautiful little girl. But the little girl didn't know who she was, and didn't know who her mother was. This feeling made her a little depressed, but for her safety, she could only choose to hide all of this. Now, she was holding the little girl like a mother, and the little girl was actually begging her to be her mother. How wonderful was this? Seeing that Irina was silent, Amy continued to promote her. Father is not only a good cook, but he is also a very, very good person. Also, let me tell you a secret. He is actually a super powerful knight. If you marry him, you will feel very safe. He can protect us. I know. He is a very powerful person. Irina nodded. Amy's face revealed a smile. Her father was indeed awesome. It seemed that he didn't need her to recommend him too much. I want to know, Amy, why do you want me to be your mother? Don't you miss your mother? Irina looked at Amy and asked softly, her left hand nervously grasping the bedsheet. I miss her too. Father said that she is a very beautiful fairy, but she went to the moon and he didn't know when she would come back. But I secretly asked big sister Barbara, and she said that there are no elves on the moon, so father must be lying. Amy's mother isn't on the moon at all. Amy pouted with an aggrieved expression. Irina's heart suddenly ached, and her heart was filled with self-blame. Although there are many beautiful sisters in the restaurant, father always looks very lonely. I think he likes you because when he looks at you, it's like there are little stars in his eyes. It's completely different from when he looks at other sisters. A smile reappeared on Amy's face as she gently touched Irina's cheek with her little hand. Also, I like you too. When I was dreaming, my mother looked exactly like you. If big sister Irina could be my mother, that would be great. Father would be very happy too. Looking at the smiling Amy, Irina couldn't help but smile as well. She pretended to think and said, if that's the case, it's a really hard request to refuse. Then agree. In the future, you can eat father's food for free. Another bowl of tofu pudding. Amy blinked her big eyes and said enticingly, I can't agree so easily. It'll depend on his performance. Irina shook her head, but a smile quickly appeared on her face. She lowered her head and kissed Amy's forehead. She gently pressed her forehead against hers and said, however, I'll allow Amy to call me mother when there's no one around. Really? Amy's eyes lit up. Of course. Irina nodded. Then can I do it now? Yes. Mother, MHM mother, MHM mother, 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 MHM, MHM, MHM. That's great. Amy has a mother too. Amy kissed Irina's cheek and then jumped out of her arms. She jumped happily on the bed with an excited smile on her little face. Irina looked at the happy Amy and felt a lump in her throat, but her face was also full of smiles. From now on, I'll always be by your side. No one can bully you, Irina said in her heart. Amy jumped for a while and shrank back into Irina's arms. She looked up at her slightly and said, Mother, go to sleep. I won't disturb you. After saying that, she closed her eyes obediently. Okay. Irina hugged Amy carefully, afraid that she would hurt her if she hugged her too tightly. However, she wanted to hug her even tighter. Although it was a little awkward, her heart was exceptionally peaceful, and she fell asleep very quickly. Meanwhile, Amy slowly opened her eyes and secretly looked at Irina. She looked left and right, and felt that her mother was the most beautiful person in the world no matter how she looked at her. It was just like a dream. After Mia and Elizabeth sent the people of Lantiste back to the Boundless Sea realm, they brought Gina back to Amy's. After taking an afternoon nap, Meg, who was full of energy again, poured a glass of water for the three of them, and asked, did everything go smoothly? Yarbemia took a big gulp of water, and nodded. Millimeter. Nothing happened along the way. That's good. You've all worked hard today. Take a rest, and we'll have hot pot and barbecue tonight to celebrate the success of this mission and welcome back Phyllis and Shirley, Meg said to the three of them with a smile. I'm going back to my bathtub to soak for a while, Gina said. When she walked past Mag, she wanted to give him a hug out of politeness. Gina, you've worked hard today. Go soak in the fish tank for a while. Your tail is already showing. Meg said with a smile as he dodged Gina's deathly entanglement easily and glanced at her fishtail that was showing from under her skirt. What a joke. Irina was staying upstairs now. His every word and action had to be gentlemanly, and he definitely couldn't be caught red-handed easily. It's really out. Gina glanced at her tail, and quickly walked towards the stairs with small, quick steps. Although she had completely adapted to life on land, her fishtail would still appear when she was extremely tired. However, it would be fine as long as she returned to the bathtub to take a nap. Phyllis, Barbara, and the rest arrived soon after. Connie wrapped a scarf around her head a few times, and asked curiously as soon as she entered, "I heard that Princess Irina is in the dining room. Can I ask her for an autograph?" "Is Princess Irina in the dining room?" Yarbemia and Elizabeth, who were sitting at the side, looked surprised at the same time. However, they didn't see her after looking around. "She's sleeping with Amy upstairs." Meg tried to speak as calmly as possible. However, why did it sound like he was saying that his wife was taking an afternoon nap with his daughter? Although that was the truth, it wasn't the time to reveal everything yet. As expected, after hearing Meg's words, everyone looked at him differently. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1276. Meg furrowed his brows as the atmosphere became tense. He was trying to think of a way to explain the situation. The princess has just arrived at Chaos City, and she hasn't found a place to stay yet. She's very tired after the battle in the morning, so we had to trouble you to lend her a bedroom, Firis quickly explained as she looked at Meg apologetically. "Sorry for the trouble. It's all right. It's just a small matter." Meg shook his head with a smile. How could it be called trouble for his wife? After hearing Firis's words, everyone seemed to have understood what was going on. Now that she said it, it seemed like there was no problem. Furthermore, they had seen Alex with their own eyes today. That man who rode a griffin into battle was completely different from Meg. "You guys can sit for a while longer. We'll start eating when everyone is here," Meg said as he turned and went into the kitchen. Hot pot, barbecue, and a set meal were arranged. What a good sleep. Irina opened her eyes and stretched her back with a smile. The string in her brain that had been tense for months finally relaxed. Lying in the soft and warm bed and having a good sleep, she felt very satisfied mentally and physically. This feeling was simply too comfortable. Suddenly, she felt a movement beside her. She turned her head and saw Amy, who was lying in her arms, looking at her with her big eyes and a sweet smile on her little face. "Mother, you're so beautiful," Amy praised. "Millimeter, Amy has good taste." Irina nodded with a smile. There was nothing happier than to wake up with Amy in her arms and listen to her praises. Growl. Right at this moment, two stomachs sounded almost at the same time. The two of them looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "All right, let's get up and eat." Irina got up. Her long silver hair, which almost reached her calves, cascaded down like a waterfall. Even after sleeping, it didn't affect its softness and luster at all. She picked Amy up from the bed and helped her put on her clothes clumsily. "Mother, I want to tie my hair into a bun," Amy said to Irina as she sat on the edge of the bed and scratched her messy hair. "A bun?" Irina looked at Amy in confusion. "It means tying your hair up like a small bun." Amy gestured to her head and added, "Father is very good at it. Don't you know how to do it?" Who said I can't? I'm much better than him," Irina said confidently. When it comes to hair tying, she can't lose to Meg, but will it really look good with a meatball tied on the head? This made Irina somewhat suspicious of Meg's aesthetics. "I'm sitting properly." Amy hugged her little makeup box and sat down obediently. Irina stroked Amy's soft hair and asked, "Amy, do you want a big meatball or a small meatball? Can it be made into a big meatball?" Amy was a little surprised. Her father had always tied her hair into small meatballs. She had never tied a big meatball before. "Of course, there's nothing I can't do." Irina nodded proudly. "Then I want a big meatball. I like to eat big meatballs." Amy nodded repeatedly and looked at herself in the mirror expectantly. If it's a big meatball. Irina hesitated for a moment, then her 10 slender fingers started moving on Amy's head. Father, do you think my big meatball looks good? Amy ran downstairs and jumped to the kitchen door as she shouted at Meg, who was in the kitchen. This. Meg, who was about to taste the soup, turned around and saw Amy with her silver hair tied into a big hollow meatball on top of her head like a bird's nest. His hand trembled and spilled the soup. What kind of surreal hairstyle is this? Meow. Upon hearing Amy's voice, Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the counter and taking a nap, opened its eyes. It was so shocked that it jumped a meter into the air, and all its hair stood on end as it looked at Amy in horror. Everyone looked at Amy's filial hairstyle with astonishment. They had never seen Boss tie up such a wild hairstyle for Amy before. Meg was just thinking about how to comment on this spectacular bird's nest hairstyle. After all, this hairstyle was not something that ordinary people could pull off, let alone a cute little girl like Amy. I did it for Amy, Irina said to Mag as she came downstairs to the kitchen door. She looked a little smug and nervous at the same time. Meg looked at Irina, who seemed to be very satisfied with her work, and swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He quickly squeezed out a sincere smile, and said to Amy, "It's really beautiful. It's even prettier than the little meatballs that Father tied for Amy. I'm sure the birds will like it when we go out. Wow, big sister Irina is really awesome." Amy turned to look at Irina with little stars in her eyes. "It's a piece of cake. If Amy likes it, I can do it for you often in the future." A smile appeared on Irina's face. She felt very accomplished after receiving Meg's praise. She looked at Meg with a gentle gaze. Meg turned around and continued to taste the soup. He heaved a long sigh of relief. "Thank goodness I'm quick-witted. I almost couldn't help but complain." So it was Princess Irina who tied it up. Everyone, who had thought that the hairstyle was a little strange, suddenly understood. Perhaps it was a new trend in the wind forest. Although it looked a little strange, it was very close to nature in the forest. Phyllis looked at Irina with a little surprise. The princess had always kept her hair long because she didn't want to comb it. Hair that had been kissed by the god of life didn't have to worry about knots and tangles. Even a strand of hair falling out occasionally was a small occurrence. Hello, Princess Irina. I'm your loyal fan and have admired you since I was a child. Can I have your autograph?" Connie dashed forward and stopped in front of Irina. She bent over at a 90-degree angle and handed over a pen and paper with both hands as she said agitatedly, "Orc. Cat girl." Irina looked at Connie's slightly trembling pink ears and couldn't help but reach out and pinch them. Connie, who was bent over, let out a moan. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed at Irina's feet. She looked up, blushed, and panted slightly. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Irina with a wronged expression. Has she been trained? How did she fall so skillfully? Irina withdrew her hand and looked at Connie teasingly. This little fellow was really interesting. It was as if there was a switch installed on her ears. She fell with a gentle pinch. She looked at her cat ears that had become more pink and soft, and asked curiously, "What will happen if I blow air into them?" Chapter 1277. Princess Irina touched my ear. Connie shuddered. Although her ears hadn't been blown yet, she already felt a little itchy. But her expression was a little excited. Being touched by her idol was such an intimate action. That was too blissful. Princess Irina was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Her exquisite face was like the most perfect sculpture by the gods. Her noble aura was far superior to any woman she had ever seen. Her silver hair flowed down her back like a waterfall. She was indeed the most beautiful woman in the world. She had loved hearing stories about Princess Irina ever since she was a child. Regardless of whether it was her love affair with Alex or the shocking things she had done, she had left behind many legends on the Norland continent. Even Alex's brilliance couldn't overshadow her in the slightest. She was still the elven princess, and not just Alex's woman. Connie blushed slightly as she extended her ear toward Irina, and said expectantly, "If you like, please touch it to your heart's content. Then I won't stand on ceremony." Irina reached out to pinch Connie's ear again. It was soft and warm, and she would squeal whenever she pinched it. It was indeed very interesting. "Huh." She successfully tamed the cat-eared girl. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly as he looked at the squealing Connie being tamed by Irina. He fell into deep thought. Something didn't seem right. Isn't Connie too happy? No, I have to think of a way. Barbara, who was standing at the side, looked enviously at Connie, who was being caressed. She was also Irina's diehard fan now. Princess Irina looks even more beautiful up close. She's like a goddess from heaven. Yarbemia looked at Irina enviously. Elizabeth placed her hand gently on Mia's shoulder, and whispered into her ear, "You're a princess too. You don't have to be envious of others. I just want to be a waitress. I don't think I can be a princess." Mia shook her head, but she didn't look disappointed. Instead, she looked quite satisfied. Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia with a smile on her cold face. "That's good too. Mamis is pretty good. Where is Little Bat?" Irina played with Connie's ears for a while. She curiously searched for Camilla in the restaurant. She was a mature woman who liked to play. She was quite interesting. "Camilla said she has something to do tonight, so she won't be coming," Barbara said. "I see." Irina felt a little regretful. She hadn't figured out what had happened last time. She should have let her, talk for a while before he knocked her out with a stool. "All right, let's eat. Let's eat the hot pot first, then I'll grill the meat skewers for everyone." Meg pushed the small dining cart out of the kitchen and placed the white pot in the middle of the hot pot table. Then, he gestured for everyone to take a seat. "What is this? Are we eating it now?" Irina asked curiously as she looked at the hot pot. Phyllis and Shirley were also curious. They hadn't seen hot pot before they left. "This is hot pot. When the soup is boiling, put the ingredients into the pot." Meg took out a hot pot recipe book and handed it to the three of them. Then, he explained to them how to eat hot pot in detail. How could hot pot and barbecue be without beer? A large wooden barrel was already set up at the side. Other than the 4 children, everyone's cups were already filled with clear beer. "We beast men can drink too," Connie protested as she shook the fruit juice in her blanket. "Don't you have to ride your bike to learn from your master tonight?" Meg placed the boiled duck intestine into Amy's bowl. "This little bit of alcohol won't affect my learning. I can hold my liquor very well," Connie promised. "I'm talking about drunk driving." Meg shook his head and said calmly, "There are thousands of roads, but safety comes first. Drinking while riding a bike will make your family cry." Connie looked at Meg resentfully and took a big gulp of her fruit juice. Barbara also took a sip of her fruit juice. Sure enough, it tasted even better when someone was drinking fruit juice with her. Meg boiled a piece of tripe and was about to put it into Amy's bowl. Irina, who was sitting next to Amy, glanced at the tripe, then looked up at Meg. Meg's hand froze. He looked at Amy, then at Irina. He felt a tinge of jealousy. Their identities hadn't been made public yet, so it didn't seem appropriate for him to boil Irina's tripe. But it also didn't seem appropriate for him to only boil it for Amy. Wasn't this too difficult? "Big sister Irina hasn't eaten hot pot yet. Father, you must have boiled this tripe for her. Let me help you put it into her bowl." Amy, who was sitting between the two of them, picked up her chopsticks and put the tripe into Irina's bowl. Then she smiled as if she was presenting a treasure. "This tripe is super delicious. Thank you, Mr. Mac, for your hospitality," Irina said to Meg with a smile, emphasizing the words Mr. Mac. "You're welcome." Meg wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Luckily, Amy was smart. Otherwise, he wouldn't know how to deal with this. Amy glanced at Meg and gave him a look that said, "I can only help you this much." Meg blushed with shame. It wasn't his style to use a child as a wingman when flirting with girls. Irina picked up the tripe with her chopsticks and put it into her mouth. The spicy and crispy tripe made a crunching sound as she chewed on it. It was like her teeth were playing a beautiful melody, bringing her a very pleasant enjoyment. This tripe is so delicious. It was a thin slice, and she swallowed it very quickly. Irina looked at Mag, longing for more. I'll teach you how to boil it. Pick up a piece of tripe and put it into the boiling hot pot. Wait for a second, lift it out of the red soup, let it cool in the air for a second, and then put it back into the red soup. Repeat this 7 times, and the tripe will welcome its most glorious moment. Meg naturally put the piece of tripe into Irina's bowl and said, "Try it." Irina picked up the piece of tripe and put it into her mouth. Feeling the delicious taste blossom on the tip of her tongue, she revealed a satisfied smile and nodded. "Yes, it's also very delicious. But I didn't see it clearly just now. Mr. Mac, can you demonstrate it to me again?" "In that case, I can only demonstrate it to you again." Meg smiled a little helplessly. He picked up another piece of tripe, boiled it, and put it into Irina's bowl again. "How do you boil this?" "This is fat beef. Also put it into the soup pot with chopsticks, but it's faster than the tripe." "What about this one with a hole?" "This is lotus root slices. It needs to be boiled for a while." Then, everyone at the table looked at Meg with a strange expression as he taught them step by step, rinsing all kinds of ingredients and putting them into Irina's bowl. Everything seemed to be fine. A princess who wasn't very good at using her hands and a hospitable boss. However, why do I smell a strange sour smell? Connie leaned over and whispered to Barbara. "I smell it too." Barbara nodded and lowered her head to sniff her dipping sauce. "Did I put too much vinegar in it?" "Have you learned it?" Meg asked with a smile as he put 2 pieces of potato into Irina's bowl. Chapter 1278. Meg's heart suddenly skipped a beat at the sight of Irina's smile. She was like a barefooted young girl in a field of blossoming spring flowers, so pure and beautiful. "Crap, it's the feeling of my heart beating." Meg's brows furrowed slightly as he could already feel his heart beating in an abnormal manner. Irina's smile widened at the sight of Meg's unnatural expression, and she said, "I want to eat kebabs right now." Everyone rolled their eyes at Meg and Irina. Even though they hadn't eaten anything, they still felt a strange sense of fullness. Amy nodded with satisfaction as she looked at Meg with a gratified expression. She seemed to be very pleased with her father's performance. "You guys eat, I'll go make kebabs for you." Meg got up and walked toward the kitchen with a smile on his face. Irina was still as innocent and romantic as ever. This night belonged to everyone at Mammoth. There was hot pot, barbecue, and an unlimited supply of beer. After being separated, they were reunited again. They had gone from strangers to acquaintances from all over the world. Perhaps it was a miraculous fate that brought people from all over the world together because of Mammy Restaurant. "I like Mammoth, I like everyone, I want to stay here forever, with everyone." Yarbemia raised her hand with a flushed face, and before she could finish her sentence, she collapsed in Elizabeth's arms. Elizabeth's face was also slightly red, but she was clearly still sober. She hugged Yarbemia with a resigned expression, and her eyes were filled with doting love. If she could live happily like this forever, then staying at Mammoth would be a pretty good thing. "Let's all get drunk, then I'll carry all of you back one by one." Barbara propped up her chin with one hand as she chewed vigorously on the beef cubes in her mouth. Even though there was no alcohol to drink, she could still eat an unlimited supply of kebabs, and that was a super blissful thing. "If I go back to the Moon Nation, I won't be able to eat such delicious kebabs. If the teleportation portal is fixed, should I go back?" Barbara was a little troubled as she thought about it. Even though there was no one to serve her here, and she couldn't enjoy the admiration of everyone, her life seemed to be quite interesting. She could eat all kinds of delicious food every day, and she had friends who were on par with her. It was much more interesting than being in the palace of the Moon Nation. Meg passed the last kebab to Amy as he looked at the drunken ladies, and said, "Let's call it a day. Everyone is a little drunk. Let's go back and have a good rest. And rest. I'll do the cleaning work." He felt that he seemed to have underestimated the women's alcohol tolerance. They actually drank all the 50 liters of beer in the barrel. I'm not drunk. Gina, who had already transformed into a fish tail, stood up unsteadily. She walked around and found Meg. Then, she walked in a snake-like manner to Meg. She revealed a silly smile and said loudly in Lantistean, "Mr. Meg, I like you." She closed her eyes as soon as she finished her sentence and pounced on Meg. The wine glass in her hand also fell to the ground. Meg quickly caught the glass with one hand and grabbed Gina's waist with the other to prevent her head from hitting the corner of the table. Phew! Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he looked at Gina, who had already fallen asleep. Luckily, he was quick to react. What did she say just now? Irina stood up with the wine glass in her hand. She glanced at Gina, who was in Meg's arms, and asked Meg with drunken eyes. Meg's expression froze instantly. Although it was Gina's drunken words that couldn't be taken seriously, could they be repeated? However, he quickly realized that Irina didn't understand Lantistean. He was the only one in the entire restaurant who could understand those words. His expression immediately returned to normal, and he smiled. She said she was drunk, and asked me to help her back to sleep. Is that true? Irina's beautiful eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she looked at him with a questioning gaze. She's still staying in the fish tank upstairs, and everyone is drunk. So, I had to help her up, Meg said calmly. Then, you can help her up. Irina nodded. She knew that Gina was staying in the restaurant the last time, and Gina was indeed drunk. Millimeter. Meg carried Gina horizontally, and walked towards the stairs in a gentlemanly manner with a fist's distance between them. Meg heaved a sigh of relief when he turned at the staircase. Luckily, he was quick-witted. Otherwise, he didn't know if he would have to suffer the pain of domestic violence tonight. Meg opened the door, and placed Gina gently into the big fish tank. Gurgle. Once she entered the water, Gina began to spit bubbles while wagging her tail. The bubbles of various sizes formed a string as if she was going to spit out all the beer bubbles that she drank earlier. It should be fine, right? Meg observed for a while to make sure that Gina wouldn't be in danger from vomiting and choking herself before going downstairs. Yarbemia and the rest had already left, but the dining table had been cleaned up. Look, is it done well? Irina asked Meg as she turned to look at him. Meg took a look at the bowls and plates that were cleaned but stacked up like children's building blocks. He raised his eyebrows slightly, but still nodded with a smile as he looked at the expectant Irina. It's perfect. This kind of work is too easy. There's no challenge at all. Irina might look relaxed, but she couldn't hide the smile in her eyes. Meg walked up and smiled at Irina. Yes, it's such a waste to let you do this kind of work. There happens to be an empty lady boss position in the restaurant. Are you interested in considering it? Amy, who was hugging Ugly Duckling and squatting at the side, had her eyes lit up as she whispered to Ugly Duckling, "Wow, is father enlightened?" "Lady boss." Irina looked at Meg with a smile, and said, "Beg me. There are so many young ladies eyeing this position. If you miss it, it won't be there." Meg smiled. "There are even more men eyeing me. If I miss it, it'll be someone else's." Irina's lips curled up slightly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. This was to determine his status in the family. For the sake of his future status in the family, he definitely couldn't give in so easily. He had to, "Father, just give in. You can't beat big sister Irina anyway," Amy said with a serious expression. Meg was instantly speechless. His daughter's words were really hurtful. He didn't deserve to have status in the family. Amy walked over to Irina with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She rubbed her head against Irina's hand, and happily said, "Also, big sister Irina has already agreed to be my mother." Meg looked at Irina with a hint of surprise. Someone doesn't seem to be sincere. Irina picked up Amy and sighed softly. Looks like Amy can sleep with me in the future. Chapter 1279. That's great. I like to sleep with mother, Amy said happily. She threw Ugly Duckling aside and hugged Irina's neck happily before kissing her on the cheek. I like to sleep with Amy too, Irina said with a smile. She also kissed Amy on the cheek before looking at Meg proudly. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling looked at Amy resentfully and moved closer to Meg. In this family, it had also lost its status. Meg looked at the mother-daughter pair and was surprised that Irina would come clean with Amy so quickly. He also felt a little guilty. After coming to this world, he had been very cautious and restrained. Whether it was the hatred that Alex carried or this world that was gradually becoming chaotic, it could easily crush him and Amy. With the activation of Amy's, his strength had also gradually increased. However, compared to those enemies, it was still not enough. Therefore, he lived even more cautiously, and carefully erased any connection between Alex and Amy's, including Irina. Amy had asked him several times about her mother, and Meg made up a fairy tale. Even after meeting Irina in Rodu, he still didn't tell her that Irina was her mother. Now that he thought about it, he was indeed not a good father, nor a good husband. He lived too cautiously and carefully. He restrained his emotions and tried to make Amy control her emotions too. A 4-year-old child with her mother right in front of her, but he still wanted to continue hiding it from her. He was really a terrible father. Irina looked at Meg and seemed to read his thoughts. She smiled and said, "Meg is a very smart child." "Yes, Amy is the smartest child I've ever seen." Meg nodded and looked at Amy with a smile on his face. "Yes, much smarter than a certain someone." Irina glared at Meg before carrying Amy to the stairs. "Amy, let's go upstairs and sleep." "Wait a minute," Meg suddenly said. He reached out and picked up a bouquet of blue roses that the system had delivered in real time. Irina turned around and looked at Meg. She looked at the big pot of blue flowers in his hand with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "When did he prepare flowers?" "This beautiful elf lady, would you be willing to become the lady boss of Amy's?" Meg went down on one knee and handed the bouquet to her. "Wow, what beautiful flowers." "Mother, just say yes," Amy egged in Irina's arms. Irina looked at Meg, who was kneeling on one knee and looking at her with clear and passionate eyes. The faint fragrance of the flowers wafted over, and the blue roses shone with a devilish luster under the light. Irina's nose twitched slightly, and a glimmer of light appeared in her eyes. It had been 3 years. In the 3 years that she had lost them, she had lived in despair every day. She had no one to rely on, and she could only live on the belief of revenge. And now, their family of 3 was finally together again. Then, Irina sniffled and reached out to take the bouquet. She raised her chin slightly and put on a proud expression. "Then I'll reluctantly accept." "That's great. Then we're a family." Amy clapped her little hands happily. She didn't expect her father to be so powerful. He had managed to trick her mother so quickly. And from today onwards, she would also have a mother and a father. This was too blissful. Meg stood up and spread open his arms to embrace Irina and Amy. The 3 of them leaned their heads together and smiled happily. "No one will be able to separate our family again," Meg said with certainty in his heart. Irina pressed her forehead against Meg's, and the panic and emptiness in her heart were instantly filled with the warmth of a family. She found peace and happiness. Meg also had a smile on his face, and he was overjoyed from his successful confession. He was sure that he had already fallen in love with Irina. This naive and romantic elf, this adorable and kind woman, this tenacious and powerful queen. In 2 worlds, there had never been a woman who could attract him so much. He wanted to protect her and make her his. She was not under his control, and she had her own thoughts and persistence. It turned out that such a person was the one he truly wanted. "Although I agreed to be the lady boss, I'm only the lady boss for now." Irina looked at Meg with a hint of warning. "As for the rest, it'll depend on your performance." "Okay, lady boss." Meg nodded immediately. He felt an inexplicable sense of regret. As for his status in the family and his position as the husband, were they important? "What else is there?" Amy asked curiously. Irina and Meg were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "After eating hot pot, you smell like hot pot." Irina changed the topic and sniffed Amy's hair. "Your hair too. Wait a moment, I'll go fill the tub for you. Take a bath before you go to bed." Meg immediately cleared the dishes and went upstairs to fill the bathtub with warm water. This bathtub is quite big. Irina bent down and scooped some water with her hand. She looked up at Meg. Her neckline sank slightly, revealing her fair skin. Actually, I'm also. Meg reached out and unbuttoned a button. You can take a bath and go to bed too. Next door. Irina straightened up and pointed in the direction of the door with a smile. There was a hint of a mischievous smile in her smile. Okay. Meg obediently buttoned his shirt, then squatted down and kissed Amy on the forehead. He smiled and said, Amy, you have to sleep well. Father won't tell you a bedtime story today. Good night, baby. Okay, good night, Father. Amy kissed Meg on the cheek, then whispered in his ear, I'll put in a good word for you to Mother. Good girl. Meg smiled and patted Amy on the head. With a daughter like this, what more could a man ask for? What are you whispering about? Irina looked at the two of them. Amy said with a little jealousy, Father told me to take good care of Mother. He's so biased. I'm the baby. Okay, Mother will take care of you. Irina picked up Amy and rolled her eyes at Meg, but she couldn't hide the smile at the corners of her mouth. Now you're a master at flirting. Meg looked at Amy with some admiration. The little girl's mouth could be as cold as winter, but also as sweet as honey. He should learn from her. Then you two go to bed early. The pajamas are on the bed. There's a new set of clothes in the wardrobe. You can wear them tomorrow, Meg said, then turned and walked out of the bathroom. He put the pajamas that had just been delivered by the system on the bedside, then opened the wardrobe door to confirm that the custom-made dress for Irina was in place. Only then did he close the bedroom door and go out. Chapter 1280. Soon, a 3D model of the restaurant appeared in Meg's mind. On the surface, it looked similar to Amy's. It was also a two-story building, but the outer wall structure was more simple and streamlined. However, Meg still found it hard to associate it with a supersonic flying machine that could travel at 5 Hz. Meg used his mind to control the model and found 16 thrusters at the bottom of the restaurant. The thrusters were conceived by a science fiction writer in your country. If it is enlarged, it can theoretically propel the Earth forward. Of course, I have improved it a little. It is not burning stone, but nuclear power, the system said proudly. Using this to propel the restaurant is really extravagant. Meg was speechless. It was a pity that he did not make it in time for the movie. He only saw the trailer before he transmigrated. This shouldn't be the flying mode, right? Meg asked again. The restaurant can switch to the flying mode in 3 seconds and take off in 5 seconds. The supersonic acceleration time is 10 seconds. This is the normal mode. Let's switch to the flying mode and see, Meg said in his mind. Switching to the flying mode, the restaurant model began to change. It gradually became round, with the lower end protruding and the upper end becoming small. The whole thing turned into the shape of a water droplet. The thrusters were all over the flying machine. Fuck, this flying machine is a little ugly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the water droplet-shaped restaurant, he felt that it was a little familiar. This is the latest model of the flying house. It gathers the most advanced aviation technology. While achieving extreme speed, it also has a very rich operating space. For example, this, and this. Then, Mag saw a shooting star scurrying madly in his mind. Alright, stop your boring showing off. Meg rolled his eyes. He was dazzled. This system was really giving him a headache. Then, Meg clicked on the interior of the restaurant to take a look. The internal structure of the restaurant was similar to Amy's, but there was an option to change the style with one click. According to the requirements of the mission, the host can change the style of the restaurant with one click, so that the restaurant can better integrate into the local area, the system quickly explained. This function is quite practical. Meg nodded. Although he didn't know what kind of mission the system would give him, it was equivalent to adding a changeable function to the restaurant, which would save him a lot of money. After exiting the restaurant, Meg closed his eyes and began to rest. Today, in order to perform for 15 minutes, he had seriously overdrawn his body. As soon as he lay down, exhaustion began to surge. City Lord's mansion. Roland looked at Michael and said softly, "It has been confirmed that 2 employees from Mammoth have returned." Irina has been eating at Mammoth for lunch and dinner. Michael pondered for a moment before looking at Michael. "What do you think?" Rankster's daughter is now at Mammoth. A few days ago, that half-dragon girl seemed to have successfully awakened the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe and received Jinx's care. She should already have the ability to transform. You mean, the 2 giant dragons that appeared in the underground cavern were the 2 waitresses from Mammoth, and the appearance of those mysterious people is also related to Mammoth? Michael frowned. Actually, we should have noticed long ago that Meg is a very mysterious person. Although some evidence pointed to him as a fugitive young master from a fallen family in Rodu, a thief caught by the Grey Temple yesterday inadvertently revealed something. That fugitive young master died outside Mammoth on a rainy night some time ago, but the Grey Temple and the City Lord's mansion didn't receive any reports related to this matter. The corners of Roland's mouth curled up slightly. Although he didn't mention Meg's appearance in Rodu gave people the impression that he was that fugitive young master. Is this really just a coincidence? Who do you think he is? Michael looked into Roland's eyes, and lowered his voice even more. 4 years ago, the demons, the Magus Tower, and the elves worked together to set up a trap to kill Alex and completely cripple him. Not long after, news of his death spread. After 3 years, Alex appeared again, and killed Benson, the spatial demon, at his peak power to save Irina. He announced his return, but there was an additional mask on his face. And, very coincidentally, Meg happened to be in Rodu at that time because he was invited by the Wrath King. An ordinary restaurant owner suddenly became concerned about the general situation of the world, and because the waitress of the restaurant asked us to help the Night Elves. And after we rejected them, Alex appeared in the underground cavern battlefield and killed Borge forcefully. Right after that, a golden dragon and a frost dragon descended with hundreds of mysterious powerhouses, and defeated the army of the Wind Forest. And, we seem to have forgotten one thing. Alex has his own name. Meg Alex. This is his full name, Roland said in a low voice as he looked into Michael's eyes. The secret chamber suddenly became quiet, and only the light from the oil lamp flickered slightly. "Are you sure?" Michael's voice was a little hoarse. He suddenly felt that his throat was a little dry. If Amy is the daughter of Meg and Irina, this can also explain why the elves worked together with the demons and the Magus Tower to kill Alex back then. The Elven Queen would never allow herself to be pregnant with a human's child. Alex changed his face and became the Chef Meg in Chaos City. Everything can be explained. But, how did Alex become Mr. Mac? It's already a miracle that he was able to recover from his terrible injuries back then. Isn't it the biggest flaw in this deduction to be able to achieve such superb culinary skills in just 3 years? Michael shook his head in disbelief. Since his Alex, what's impossible? Roland asked. Michael choked, and was actually speechless. The secret chamber fell into silence again. Then, what should we do now? Inform the world, or lay our cards on the table with him directly? Michael asked. Although he didn't get Meg to admit it personally, just like what Roland said, this possibility was already close to the truth. Neither of these 2 choices will do us any good. Roland shook his head with a smile, and said, since Alex's philosophy is the same as ours, and is clearly on our side, why should we lay everything out in the open? A poisonous snake hiding in the dark is easier to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. What we should do now is to help him hide better, and help him cover up the traces that is exposed. That's a good idea. Michael nodded with a smile. Chapter 1281. That night, the Norland continent was destined to be chaotic. A young thief was locked up in the 18th floor of the Bastille prison because he said something he shouldn't. No one was allowed to come in contact with him. The Wind Forest fell into chaos because of Borge's death. Borge had left behind a huge foundation. Without a leader, how were the families in Borg's faction going to deal with themselves? Meanwhile, the elves at the bottom had some new ideas because of the miraculous victory of the night elves. The idea of fighting for freedom for the rest of their lives started to spread in the chaos. It was as if there was a mysterious force pushing it, and it started to spread like wildfire. Sally, the high priest, asked me to take over Borg's position as the commander of the elves. The chance for the Brewster family to rise is here. Elliot walked around the room excitedly. He looked at Sally and said, "Soon, we will be able to replicate the glory of the Borg family and become the #1 family in the Wind Forest. And then be killed like Borg, and the whole family will be divided by those fellows who supported him in the past," Sally said with a cold expression. She looked at Elliot with disappointment. Elliot's expression froze, but he quickly turned to Sally with a smile and said, "How can that be? I am different from Borg. He wants to be the king of the Wind Forest, but I don't. You will become the new princess of the Wind Forest soon. Then, you will be the king of the Wind Forest, and our Brewster family will become the new royalty of the Wind Forest." Sally pursed her lips and shook her head. "Father, Princess Irina is not dead, and so is Alex. Furthermore, they have the support of a powerful force that is not weaker than the elves. This huge defeat has made the elves start to reflect on freedom and resistance. The false prosperity of the Wind Forest can't last much longer. Do you want to sink deeper and deeper?" "No, that's impossible," Elliot shouted with a little fanaticism. "The Wind Forest will never lose. When have those slaves ever really obeyed us? But in the face of great power and the whip, how would they dare to resist? When you become the queen of the elves, I will still be the marshal of the elves. The Wind Forest and the Brewster family will gain great prosperity and glory. What if I don't support you?" Sally pouted. Elliot was stunned. He looked at Sally and raised his voice. "What did you say? What if I want those low-level elves to regain their freedom after I become the queen?" Sally looked into Elliot's eyes and asked without averting her gaze. "Pa." A crisp sound of a slap was heard. Sally covered her face and took 2 steps back. She looked at Elliot in disbelief. The father who had doted on her since she was young actually hit her? "How dare you say such a thing? Do you know how much I've sacrificed for the glory of the Brewster family? I've forced Irina to leave, and I've forced Borg to his death. Everything is going to succeed, and the Brewster family is going to become the most glorious family in the Wind Forest. You want me to give up?" Elliot roared at Sally. Sally's eyes turned red when she saw Elliot's ferocious and crazy expression. This man was no longer the father who doted on her in every way. Profit and power had twisted him. Elliot looked at Sally, who was silent with her red eyes. He seemed to suddenly realize that his behavior was inappropriate. He quickly put down his hand and squeezed out a smile. "Sally, I didn't hit you, did I? I didn't do it on purpose. I was just anxious and didn't control my emotions well. You know that I did this for you and for the family." Sally dodged Elliot's hand and shook her head slightly. "I'm fine. I'm going to rest." She then turned and walked out of the door. "How could I hit Sally?" Elliot looked at Sally walking out of the door. He slapped his hand that was frozen in the air with self-reproach. However, a fanatical smile soon appeared on his face, and he began to pace around the room again as he murmured to himself, "Once I take back my military power, Sally will ascend to the throne, and I'll be the true king of the Wind Forest. I'll do what Borg failed to do." The next morning, it wasn't the alarm clock that woke Meg up. Instead, it was 2 bell-like giggles. Meg, who was lying on the mattress on the floor, opened his eyes and saw 2 smiling faces lying on the side of the bed. One of them was big and the other was small. Their bright smiles were like a spring breeze. He couldn't help but giggle foolishly. "Father, your eyes look like a cat's." Amy drew a line along Meg's eyes with her finger. There was still some black carbon powder on her finger. "I think the mustache looks pretty good," Irina said with a smile. She covered her mouth with her hand and drew a mustache on her upper lip. "TSK, TSK. How can you bully the person with the lowest status in the family so early in the morning? How can you do that?" Meg sat up and looked at the two of them helplessly. Although he was complaining, he couldn't stop smiling. Meg picked up Amy and rubbed his face against Amy's. He looked at her face, which had turned half black, and said with a smile, "Now Amy has become a little black egg too." "Wow, that's great." Amy giggled. Then, she looked at Irina. "Then, only Mother's face is clean now." "No, no, I refuse." Irina rejected with a serious expression. However, Meg and Amy had already pounced on her. 10 minutes later, the three of them sitting on the messy little bed looked at each other's faces that had turned into big black cats and laughed at the same time. Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping at the end of the bed, opened its eyes in a daze when it heard the laughter. It jumped up from the bed with a meow and shrunk against the door, looking at the three of them in horror. "All right, go brush your teeth and wash your face."